moved this.
Well, good morning. We call this hearing on the Community of Agriculture on the state of the rural economy to come to order, and I've asked Rodney Davis to open us with a prayer. Rodney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please, if you will, bow your heads. Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to come together today in these walls of this great institution that was built around your teachings. And as a practicing Catholic, I know one of the prayers that we always do together, I would ask each of you to join us in reciting the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Power, glory. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Glad you're here this morning. Pleased to welcome Secretary Vilsack to join us this annual hearing to assess the economic conditions in farm country. And again, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. 8th time? 7th time? Logged a lot of them. In assessing the situation, I think it's fair to say that American farmers and ranchers are falling on some very hard times right now. Worse yet, I don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel. To quantify what I'm talking about, consider these facts. The 2-year drop in net farm income that occurred between 2013 and 2015 marks the second largest drop on record, behind only the drop that occurred between 1919 and 1921. Moreover, the 3-year drop in farm income from 2013 to 2016 marks the third largest on record, behind the drops of 1918 to 1921 and 1929 to 1932, two of the worst periods in American U.S. agriculture history. From 2013 to 2015, net farm income is expected to drop by a staggering 54%. Over the three-year period from 13 to 16, net farm income is expected to drop even more by 56%. While conditions on the farm are certainly different today than they were back in the early years of the 20th century, these statistics still put into context what American agriculture is going through right now and just how problematic a sustained downturn could be. In addition, as history has repeatedly demonstrated, these conditions in farm and ranch country have ramifications not only for farm and ranch families, but also for rural communities and the national economy as a whole. In short, we have a very serious problem unfolding right now in rural America. The farmers that I talk to from across the country tell me that they're very concerned that they do not see the kind of circumstances that are going to come along and end this downturn anytime soon. They're also concerned that even as the prices they receive plummet, the prices they're paying for inputs remain as high as ever. As chairman of this committee, my concern goes out to every farmer and rancher in the country, wherever they farm or ranch, and whatever they produce. But I have to confess that I have a very special concern for those farmers and ranchers who not only fully share today's economic downturn, but who never shared much in any of the economic boom that preceded the current bust. Of course, I'm speaking of those farmers and ranchers who never saw a big run-up in prices, and maybe none at all, or the farmers and ranchers who did see the run-up in prices, but never had a commodity to sell due to natural disasters. I think it's an accurate appraisal to say that a lot of farmers and ranchers from across the country are living on loans or burning up equity these days, but none more than the farmers and ranchers who never had an opportunity to build equity before these hard times came along. The best solution for this problem is for prices to turn around, but as I indicated earlier, farmers and ranchers I talk to are very skeptical that that'll happen anytime soon. For Congress's part, I believe it's our duty and our responsibility to hold the line on the Farm Bill and crop insurance, to draw a hard line against attacks that would undermine these laws and further jeopardize our nation's farmers and ranchers. The administration's budget, which proposes a 20% cut to crop insurance, as well as an attack upon crop insurance last fall during the negotiation of the bipartisan budget amendment, are not helpful. But I very much appreciate that Secretary Vilsack has done to come down on the side of the farmer and the rancher in these kind of debates. For the administration's part, I believe there are at least 5 things in the administration's power that would make a big difference for America's farmers and ranchers. First, oppose further cuts to the farm safety net provided by the Farm Bill and crop insurance. Second, initiate WTO challenges against the high and rising foreign subsidies, tariffs, and non-tariff barriers that are key culprits in the current economic crisis and conditions on our farms and ranches. Third, withdraw the Waters of the U.S. regulation that threatened to federally regulate every ditch in the country, effectively gutting any exemption for agriculture. Fourth, persuade Senate Democrats to support voluntary labeling of biotech crops and pass a federal preemption of state and local biotech labeling regimes. I know, Mr. Secretary, that you're very much committed to getting this solved. And fifth, use your authority under the law to designate cottonseed as an oil seed for purposes of the Farm Bill. On this last issue, you and I have spoken extensively. We have exchanged papers. At the bottom, the stumbling block that stands in the way, in our view, of you taking action to deal with this growing crisis of the cotton belt is your lawyers and your lawyers' belief in a lack of legal authority. Your lawyers point to a Supreme Court case that essentially held that a law cannot be interpreted in a manner that would contradict a decision that was made by Congress. This legal analysis would be spot on if we were asking you to include cotton lint under the Farm Bill. But that is not what we're asking for. We're simply asking for you to include cottonseed. As you know, the two are not the same thing, even though they come from the same plant. Including cottonseed under the Farm Bill is not including lint by another name. While Congress did consider the appropriate policy for cotton lint in the 2014 Farm Bill, Congress never considered the question of whether to include or exclude cottonseed as a part of ARC or PLC. Instead, we left that decision to you. Therefore, were you to honor the bipartisan bicameral request of more than 100 members of Congress and designate cotton seed as an oilseed, you would not be contradicting the law, and you would simply be, you would not be conducted, and you would have our full backing. I don't have to tell you that the acres planted to cotton are now at their lowest levels in 108 years, excluding 1 year in the early 1980s when the government forced set-asides. We also know that this is not due to bad management on the part of farm families. This is due in large part to the actions taken by the Chinese and the Indian governments over which our farmers have absolutely zero control. There's a very real decision to be made here. Will the United States allow foreign governments to steal our cotton production just as they stole textile mills, or will they stand up and say no this time? China and India, we will challenge your subsidies and stand by America's farmers until true free and fair trade is restored. Producers of other commodities should beware. The same thing could be happening to you. It all boils down to whether you stand by our farmers and ranchers when they are under economic assault by foreign governments. I now yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any comments that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back to the committee, Mr. Secretary. I've lost count of the number of times that you've been here in the last 7 years as Secretary, and we always appreciate your time and your advocacy for those of us in rural America. And I also look forward to your testimony today. As the Chairman indicated, we're taking a look at the rural economy today. The committee takes on this review annually, and for the past few years, we've been able to point at strong farm prices as a reason for the rural economy's success, one of the reasons. While the rural economy, I think, generally remains strong, folks are getting concerned, as the Chairman pointed out, about the potential long-term impacts of the deteriorating prices that we're seeing. Of course, this is why those of us on the Agriculture Committee work so hard to pass a farm bill, and why we do it every 5 years. But you know, I do have some concerns with the current bill because you know, we didn't get as high a target prices as I wanted, but with these low prices, this also points out why the bill's safety net is so important. I think it's also worth noting the importance of crop insurance, and despite what critics would leave you to believe, the crop insurance program is effective and a responsive tool for farmers, and I hope this committee will remain united against calls for cutting the program. And lastly, I just want to personally thank you for your paying attention to the avian influenza situation that we had last spring, and you did an outstanding job in responding to it. Your agency was right there working with us. Dr. Clifford and APHIS and so forth did you know, we had our glitches, but they did an outstanding job, and you stepping up to the plate and using your authority to deal with that was very much appreciated. And we're hoping that, keeping our fingers crossed, that we won't have another episode of that this spring. So I just want to personally thank you for that, and the folks in my area that were involved very much appreciate what you've done. So with that, there's a lot of issues that members will want to raise today, so let's get started, and I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. The chair would request other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witness may begin his testimony, and to ensure there's ample time for our questions. I'd like to welcome to our table the Honorable Tom Vilsack, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Secretary Vilsack, please begin when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and to you and to Congressman Peterson and the members of this committee, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this morning. And I look forward to the opportunity to visit about issues that matter to you and to your constituents and to people that I care about in rural America. Tomorrow we have our Outlook Forum, which is an annual event in which we review the circumstances surrounding the farm country and rural economy. What we're going to learn tomorrow is what I think most of the members, if not all the members of this committee, are fully aware of, which is that we are seeing a combination of a slowing global economy, particularly in China, which obviously reduces demand for product. A strong dollar, which is a reflection of the strong American economy, which makes our goods a bit less competitive in global markets, combined with record harvests here and elsewhere, have resulted, as the chairman indicated, in lower farm income and revenue. The extent of that lower farm income is mitigated in part by lower input costs in the form of low interest rates and energy costs. Farm values have declined a bit. They have declined moderately over the last year or so, but debt-to-equity ratios still remain extraordinarily strong and stable, significantly different than periods of time when we were faced with a significant farm crisis. We would expect and anticipate to see increased borrowing, which will place some greater reliance and stress on our loan programs at FSA, particularly our loan guarantee program. The safety net is in place and is, for the most part, working the way it was intended. $5.2 billion in payments were made last year to over 900,000 producers, and it is expected that payments from our safety net programs will increase this year. The rural economy writ large is improving in part because of the diversification that has been supported by the Farm Bill that was passed in 2014. This is reflected in the fact that we're now seeing lower unemployment, and poverty rates are coming down significantly, especially in the last 2 years. This has been helpful to farm families who are struggling with lower farm income because they also have the opportunity for off-farm income. I found it interesting, and I share with the committee this fact, that the median farm family income, total income, which would include farm and non-farm income, reached a record level this year at over $81,000. We recognize the stress in some commodity areas, and we are focused on increasing demand for American product here through the promotion of the bioeconomy and through expanded trade opportunities. That's why we believe, as I hope most, if not all, of the members of this committee believe, that it's important for Congress to act to pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. According to the American Farm Bureau Federation report that was issued yesterday, that will add an additional $4.4 billion annually in additional farm income. It'll expand American exports of farm products by $5.3 billion. This is part of an overall economic boost that we'll receive from doing business with the Asian countries, improving our overall exports by over $350 billion and our overall income to Americans by $130 billion on an annual basis. This, combined with opening up opportunities in Cuba, a market which American agriculture should dominate, should help us increase demand for product and begin getting ourselves back on strong footing. I certainly appreciate the Chairman's comments about cotton. I would say, Mr. Chairman, with respect, it is not lawyers. It is not lawyers that prevent me from doing what you would ask me to do. It's an oath that I took. It's an oath that I took at the time I took this job, which was to follow the Constitution and the laws of this country. Based on my understanding of the current circumstance and based on my understanding of the crafting of the Farm Bill, the reality is that Congress made a decision not to specifically include cottonseed in a list of other oil seeds under the other oil seed provision that you've made reference to. That decision basically made it impossible for me to do what you're asking me to do. Certainly the Congress could reopen the Farm Bill and address it then, or Congress could remove the prohibition that currently exists under the Commodity Credit Corporation and the Appropriations Bill that was passed by Congress that prevents me from using CCC to provide assistance and help. Or we could work collaboratively together to work on a cost-share program with reference to ginning that you and I have talked about, Mr. Chairman, which we are still willing to do if the industry is willing to accept this. 14% of cotton was basically protected under the STAX program. Over $300 million in payments were made. We have made efforts under our marketing loan assistance program. We have also created an opportunity for certificates to be used in lieu of collateral for loans, all of which is helping to mitigate the consequences of very low prices, of which we are very, very aware. So I look forward to an opportunity to visit with the committee on this issue and a multitude of other issues.
Well, thank the Secretary for being here. I didn't intend to go here, but Mr. Secretary, I wasn't in those rooms with Chairman Lucas and Chairman Peterson. I wasn't there, but I don't think there was any reference to cottonseed, period, during the Farm Bill negotiations. None. And so to rely on something that didn't happen, I think you've been misled. And so I just don't think that that was the case, that cottonseed didn't come up until these dire consequences arose, until it was shown that the STAX program, 14% of cotton was covered by STAX. That was nowhere near what the estimate that folks thought was going to be. It's not working. And so the cottonseed thing, to my references, came up late last year as a potential to put seed under the program and not lint. And I don't think you're arguing that seed and lint are the same thing. They come from the same plant. But this idea that somehow there was a negotiation on seed specifically during the Farm Bill negotiations, I believe is incorrect.
Mr. Chair, can I respond?
Sure. Yes, sir.
First of all, in putting together the ARC and PLC program, there was obviously a decision to remove cotton from those programs. I think everybody acknowledges that. Within the law, essentially there is provisions that define the opportunity for the Secretary to include additional oilseeds as crops as they evolve. That listing of other oilseeds includes a variety of other oilseeds. It includes sunflower seeds, rapeseed, canola seeds. Clearly, Congress could have also included cottonseed in that list. They did not. That's an issue. Secondly, the industry came to us when we were crafting the risk management program under Stacks and requested oilseed to be included in that risk management program. So those two facts, Congress didn't include it in the list, and the industry asked us to include it in the risk management program, indicate what the intent was at the time. Now, if Congress wants to reopen the Farm Bill, then obviously you'll have to deal with the issue of the cost, which I think is one of the motivating reasons why all of this was established.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. That was a discussion you may have had or may not have had with cotton folks then. That's not discussion that Congress had. Are you arguing that the list of oilseeds included is exclusive and that you have no discretion?
No, what I'm arguing is that that list and that provision is set up for oilseeds that arise during the course and between farm bills.
And how's the, where are you getting that interpretation?
Because that is the way in which this provision has been interpreted and utilized since its inception.
Okay, so it wasn't new to the 14 Farm Bill.
No, we have used this before
Right,
when seeds come, not seeds that have existed, Mr. Chairman, but seeds that have come up in between farm bills to allow us the flexibility.
So sunflower seeds are brand new to the 08? I mean, they didn't exist before 08? I mean, we gave you the discretion in order to use that discretion to look at new circumstances and
Not in this particular circumstance. You gave me the discretion to use it if something crops up that was under.
Something cropping up like the unexpected economic impact that the
No.
14 bill didn't do? That wouldn't be unexpected?
No, that's why we have CCC, and that's why it was unfortunate that Congress put the prohibition in the omnibus budget bill that restricts me from using CCC. I'm more than happy to do that, remove that prohibition, and we can set up a program to help cotton farmers in the interim, and then you can revisit this issue specifically when you debate the next farm bill.
So, but for the restrictions in CCC, it was done in 2011 in response to the things that the agency did in 2010. You could list cottonseed as a other oilseed.
Couldn't list cottonseed, but we could create a program that would provide help and assistance in the interim.
All right, and there are no other programs that you can do without that.
The other issue that we talked about was the cost share program with.
And why have you not done that?
Well, because you've indicated to us that you weren't interested in us pursuing that.
Well, but you've already decided that you know what we're interested in or not interested in. If you've got the sole discretion
I don't, sir. I don't.
to do the cost share program,
I don't.
Well,
I don't.
why?
You have to give me that discretion. You have
How?
to give me that direction because you excluded it from the previous
I don't think
Farm Bill.
cottonseed was discussed in the 2014
Well,
Farm Bill.
You had the opportunity, and it was certainly discussed in terms of the establishment of the risk management program when we were especially specifically told to include cottonseed in that program. Look, Mr. Chairman, I think the easiest thing to do right now is not for us to continue to have this discussion, but for us to figure out a way in which that prohibition in CCC could be removed, because that would allow us the most immediate way of providing help and assistance in addition to the cost share, the ginning.
Well, I've had some preliminary discussions with the Appropriations Committee. There's some historical issues with respect to the use of that, that gave rise to why that restriction has been in there since 2012. So anyway, my time has expired. We'll have a second round, perhaps. Ms. Peterson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to switch gears, Mr. Secretary, and the CRP sign-up's been going on for some time. I guess it's going to end in a week or so. Do you have any kind of a read on how that's developed and kind of where we're at with that? Do you have any information about?
It's going to be quite competitive based on the cap that's been established for CRP, and we anticipate and expect it to be quite competitive. We also are going to see competition in terms of the grassland section of CRP as well.
The grassland?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you, well, what do you mean by competitive?
Well, we have, I would say we have roughly 2 million acres of opportunity, and we think we're probably going to get requests that would exceed potentially that 2 million threshold. So in that sense, it's competitive. So we're going to have to focus our efforts on highly erodible, focus our efforts on maintaining the continuous programs, which are very popular, so that we maximize the benefit and use of this program to the extent we can based on the cap.
Well, yeah, there's a lot, you know, one of the problems we had when we wrote the Farm Bill is we wrote it when the prices were good. That's always a problem. And it was also a problem with CRP because we had people leaving CRP because they thought they could make more money farming it and renting it, whatever. We had in my part of the world, they had shelter belts taken out and all kinds of other stuff going on that I tried to warn people about. But my concern is, you know, we've seen an increase of uses of continuous, and that's good. Minnesota, we're one of the top ones in using continuous. But part of it, the biggest part of that is the CP23, the wetlands restoration thing. And that's really, the reason that's being used so much is because the ones that want to stay in CRP, that's what they've had to do in order to get back into the program. So one of my concerns is that the way we have structured this, I think we have tilted too much towards this highly erodible and using specific kinds of seeds and so forth that are very difficult to establish. I can personally attest to that. And so my concern is that, and we had a hearing on this, that we're going to focus too much of the CRP in certain areas because of the criteria that we've established with this. And one of the reasons CRP, in my opinion, has been so successful is it's been spread out in big tracts all over the place. And that happened because the original program was not a conservation program. The original program was a supply reduction program because we had low prices. And so, especially in wildlife, that's why, in my opinion, it's been so successful. I'm worried about what's going on now, that we're going to be concentrating this stuff too much in certain areas, and there's not going to be CRP in other areas because it doesn't meet with the highly erodible or whatever other criteria we have. And we got guys plowing up perfectly good cover, and some of it needs to be restored, but why we're plowing up stuff that's perfectly good, got no weeds in it, you know, it doesn't make any sense. So I hope that there's, I don't know if you have any discretion in how you do this, but I hope that we can approach this in a way that we can keep a fair amount of this stuff spread out and not get this too concentrated as you're doing the process. You know, that you don't do everything just based on the EBI, that there has to be some discretion there.
Congressman, that's I appreciate the suggestion, and I will certainly take that back and make sure that our team understands and appreciates what you just pointed out, which is the need for this program to be available in all parts of the country that really want it to be utilized. It's a fair point.
Now, the grassland, I understand there's been, what, 1 million acres offered under grassland?
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact acreage is, but I know that there is quite a bit of interest in it.
Yeah, so you got any more specifics about that, or any, other than
what
just
I've
been a lot of interest?
It's a lot of interest, and understandable because we've adjusted the rental rates now so that it is, you know, it is obviously attractive, more attractive than it has been for a while.
All right, well, thank you, and I appreciate your being willing to take a look at that. Thank you. Mr. Nealbeck.
Gentleman yells back, Mr. Nagelbauer for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Vilsack, it's good to have you here, and I appreciate you coming back again to speak to our committee. And I would say this from my perspective, and from my congressional district, your remarks about the state of the rural economy are a little bit overstated in the sense that we don't feel that same situation in West Texas. I want to associate myself, and have associated myself, with the chairman on the issue of the cottonseed oil. But one of the things I wanted to go back to is in a letter, I think, you know, you alluded to it, 100 of us sent you a letter back in December, and we encouraged the USDA to take any policy actions that could have a stabilizing effect on the U.S. cotton industry. And I think on February the 11th, you testified before the Appropriations Committee that you mentioned the possibility of providing some assistance to help with cotton ginning. Where are we on that?
Well, if it's something the industry is interested in having us pursue, and if something it's that members of Congress want us to look at, we would establish a cost-share program. We would have a discussion, obviously, about the percentage of the cost share. In my discussions with some members of Congress, we suggested a 50% cost share, which would be about $150 million. It could be more than that. And we would establish and go to OMB for permission and authority to get this set up, and we would try to get it set up as quickly as possible and provide resources to the gins or to the producers, depending upon how we need to structure it in a way that does not create any kind of trade implications that would be negative to the industry.
What's keeping us from
We've received
implementing?
indications from some folks that it's not something that the industry wanted us to do at this point in time, but if they do, and you're telling me they do, then we'll be happy to go back and start that process.
Well, I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding on that. I think one of the things that some people thought you were talking about that, I mean, obviously they were promoting the oil, cottonseed oil issue. They thought you were trying to substitute that. I think where we are, and I hope you understand that in cotton country, we have it's a severe issue. I mean, we have producers now that are not talking about how much of their equity they're willing to put into the next crop. I mean, we have producers that are sitting down with their bankers right now, and the question whether they're going to get to plant a crop, it's whether they're going to continue to farm. And so I think what those 100 of us wrote you a letter, I think we were trying to paint a picture that we need for you to use every tool that's available to you as the Secretary of Agriculture to do that. And so my feedback from the industry is if that's one of the tools in the toolbox, let's get that tool out of the box, but we're not necessarily giving up on you sitting down at the table and discussing other tools that we might be able to do, because it is a very serious issue for the cotton industry.
We're happy to do this. It's also the reason why we allowed for certificates to be used in lieu of the cotton as collateral for our loans, our marketing loans. We did do that. That's going to provide some small bit of relief, but we'll be happy to go back and start that process now. It would be helpful if we could get an indication from the industry precisely what they think in terms of the technique and the technology, or the details of how this would work on the ginning, so that we would be assured that we get as much help to producers as we possibly could. That would be helpful. We have not received that kind of feedback, but we're more than happy to sit down with the industry tomorrow to begin that process.
I think that would be extremely helpful, but I also want to reiterate, I think that we need to look at other tools, and that you may have as Secretary, because as you know, this legislative process isn't always a real quick process, and a lot of these farmers don't have 6 months or a year for us to work out. So they need for some kind of response on an immediate basis, really.
That's why having the CCC flexibility would be helpful, because that's something we could use fairly quickly. I would say, in response to the Chairman's comments about why we have that, fair enough, but I'm not going to be around, so why tie the hands of the next Secretary? Why not give the next Secretary the benefit of the doubt? Or place restrictions on it so that it's used primarily for the things you want it to be used for, but a blanket prohibition makes it really hard to do this job in light of falling commodity prices.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman's time has expired. Mr. Scott, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Vilsack, welcome. I think we need to look at this from the standpoint of the cotton farmer right now. And we have a crisis in cotton farming. It's a very, very serious situation. So let me see if we can point out a direction here. First of all, we can't solve the problem of the oil seed, because we'd have to open up the Farm Bill and go into that. So we got to put that aside. Now we have two other options here. We can go with the CCC, or we can go with the share costs in the ginning. Is that correct?
Or you could do both, the
Wonderful.
CCC and the ginning.
That's what I think we really, really need to do. My cotton farmers in Georgia this year are farming in 2015 280,000 acres less than they did before. So there is a real crisis here, and I think if we could use this hearing to send a message of security that to the farmers who may be listening in, that you as the Agriculture Secretary, we as the Agriculture Committee, we've got the farmers back. Now, here is the other issue. The other issue is if we go down this road with these two programs, we got a timing issue. Cotton planting is now for the next year. So can you explain to us, if we use both of these, your indications, and I've talked with you before about this, says that you're willing to do this, but only a year. Are you still of that mind? Because we need a much longer duration of whatever help we give the cotton farmers, more than a year.
Well, Congressman, we're willing to work to put together a plan that creates a bridge between now and the time that you all take up the next farm bill and decide how to allocate the scarce resources that you'll have available at that time to fashion a farm bill. So we're more than happy to talk about multi-year opportunities, and the CCC fix would obviously create that flexibility. And you know, we would, in terms of the ginning, we have to obviously get the information and data from the mills, and we'd be getting that probably this spring. So we would try to move as expeditiously as possible to get payments to folks. Number two, you know, I'd encourage producers that are working with bankers that are a bit skeptical about all of this to basically make sure that they understand that there are guaranteed loan programs at FSA that could potentially reduce that stress or that concern on the part of the banker, and hopefully they would utilize our programs to provide the credit to put a crop in the ground.
Okay, let me ask you, if we go with the CCC, what kind of time frame? Because I'm very much concerned about making sure that our cotton farmers realize that we will be getting help to them in time. So how long, if we went with CC&C, what would be the steps we need to do? How long would it take before the deal is in place to give the security to the farmers?
Obviously, first it depends on how quickly you all can remove the prohibition, whether you have to do that through an appropriations process or whether you can do that in some bill that's going through the Congress. Assuming that this is a direction that you all want us to take, I'm going to go back to our team and basically say, let's put together a plan that could potentially be triggered as soon as Congress, if and when Congress acts. Now, one thing we were thinking about doing in this space is the transition payment program that was in place 2014 and 15 that was restricted by Congress to 2014 and 15. That's something we could look at that we already have set up. Sometimes when you set up programs, you have technology issues, you got FSA training issues, that takes a little time. But we try to get it done as quickly as we possibly could.
Well, I'd be very interested, and I know several members on the committee would be very interested in helping to speed the process along in getting that prohibition removed in the CCC. Now, what about the ginning and the cost sharing? How long and what would that process be?
That does require us to have information from the mills, which we will get this spring, and we would anticipate shortly thereafter to be able to make payments.
Okay, well,
Assuming we get the details worked out with the industry to make sure that as we set this up, that the resources and the help gets to the producer to the extent we can do that, and to the extent that we do it in a way that doesn't create trade implications that would be negative to cotton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. You know that Georgia is the #2 cotton-producing state in the nation, next to Texas. So we're very concerned about that, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity of working as quickly as we can and assisting you in any kind of way to bring these two, the CCC and the cotton ginning share costs, to fruition quickly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time has expired, and Mr. Lucas, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, one kind of long point and two quick points. I'd like to comment on a couple of programs that are near and dear to my heart that I think are really important to rural America and preserving our resources. That's the Public All 566 and the Small Watershed Rehabilitation Program, close and dear to my heart. I think they're very important to preserving our resources. In last year's budget request, FY16, the President's own document referenced the program is helping communities to adapt to changes in natural resources conditions, minimize the impact of natural disasters through the broad authorities provided by the program, a strategic combination of land treatment, structural measures, floodplain easements that be used to help communities create a more resilient infrastructure and natural resource system. I couldn't have said it better myself than the administration said. I was a little surprised, and I won't deny disappointed, to see that there was no funding included in the President's budget proposal for this year. Could you talk for a moment about the Small Watershed Upstream Flood Control Program, PL 566, and the rehabilitation program, and why they matter?
Why they matter?
Why they're important, why they matter. I think they do. I believe you do too.
Well, first of all, I would say they matter because you think they matter. I recognize...
You're a wise cabinet secretary, sir.
Look, they matter for a number of reasons. One, because of the complexity of our land, because of the way in which it has evolved over time, because of the impact of changing climates, intense weather patterns, weather variability, there is a ever-changing landscape that creates risks. And to the extent that you have programs big and small to help you manage those changes, it's helpful. The challenge, of course, is how you fit all of the needs into a confined budget that has parameters that have been fixed from the top and basically filter down and limit the appropriations process.
Absolutely, Mr. Secretary. And for my colleagues' benefit, those who may not have focused on the program, we're talking about building relatively small earthen dams, interlocking systems to manage floods, to keep soil and water in place, to allow it to meter through, to protect human life, property, and wildlife. A program began back in the 1940s, very successful. That note, Mr. Secretary, let me step over to another topic, and I would be remiss now at approximately 7 years into your tenure as Secretary of the Ag, if I didn't laud you. Your help during the 2012 and 13 and 14 Farm Bill process was very important in working with both this committee and the other committee on the other side of campus, so to speak, to overcome some really difficult circumstances. We went through some challenges, all of us on this committee, and working with you and your good folks to finally achieve the Agricultural Act of 2014, and I appreciate that, and I laud you for that. But I have to conclude by simply saying, in respect to my constituents back home and what my colleagues here are noting, there's some real challenges going on in certain sectors of agriculture back home. Cotton is one of those situations where we worked with the industry, we worked with every insightful group to try and address the WTO ruling, to try and craft something that would work within the general framework of the Farm Bill. It was a tough process, and unfortunately, as is demonstrated back home, it wasn't a perfect result. We vest you and the very, very bright people that you choose down at the department to help you implement the law with a great deal of discretion. I would urge you to look at the situation as it pertains to cottonseed and to try to, in whatever way you can, use that discretion to the maximum benefit of the folks back home that both you and I represent. I know you'll do what you can legally. I'm not an attorney, but I believe the way the language was put together, there are really bright attorneys out there who can achieve that necessary flexibility. But with that, again, thank you for your efforts on the Farm Bill. And I know you'll do whatever you can.
Mr. Chairman, you had a difficult job, obviously, and anybody who was part of that process, and it was made more difficult by the fact that you all had committed to providing a savings of, as I remember, $23 billion, and that required some very difficult choices to be made. At the same time, there were concerns from an international trade perspective, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we're where we are. You know, we're going to continue to look for ways in which we can provide help and assistance, but you know, as you all feel very strongly about your oaths, I feel strongly about the one I took.
I would simply say in regards to the 2014 Farm Bill, the old adage about it's not your friend, it's not your enemies that'll get you, it's your friends sometimes is entirely true. With that, Mr. Secretary, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Jim Wheels back. Mr. Costa, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing. And Mr. Secretary, I want to commend you for your years of service to our country and to American agriculture. We've not always agreed, but you've always been willing to try to be there to solve problems, both for the 2 farm bills that we've worked on and the implementation of those farm bills. I've got a series of questions I want to ask you, but you know, I am struck by the numbers. In 1954, the average age of an American farmer was 48 years of age. Today, the average age of an American farmer is 59 years of age. And what we see is, with 2.5% of America's population directly involved in the production of food and fiber, a comfort level that I think is alarming to me, that Americans take their food products for granted. It is a national security issue, and we don't treat it like a national security issue. The fact of the matter is that American farmers, ranchers, and dairymen produce the most cost-effective, healthiest food anywhere in the world that allows the rest of our country to be able to have a healthy diet and to go about their business. And frankly, I think we have to do a better job of highlighting the importance of the security of America's food production as we talk about a host of issues, whether it's economic conditions in our rural communities, whether we talk about the trade agreements, whether we talk about the dairy industry, or whether we talk about cotton, as many of my colleagues have mentioned in their earlier comments and questions. Mr. Secretary, can you please explain to me, and I want to make it local for a moment, just briefly, with the drought conditions that we're facing in California. You're not in control of the water, federal water systems or the state water systems, but what additional aid that the USDA is undertaking to provide emergency assistance for farmers during this drought relief briefly, because I have a couple other questions.
Disaster assistance for livestock producers, additional emergency conservation funding, additional resources from rural development for the development of municipal water systems. Those would be 3 things: additional research that is allowing us to do better jobs with irrigation, and seed technology that's going to allow us to produce crops with less water.
Well, we appreciate that, and we may be looking at La Nina conditions, sadly, next winter, and we may need more help. Rural definitions are a problem for many of us who have districts, and you've been to my district several times, and I thank you, meeting with farmers and ranchers and dairymen and women, dealing with communities where, you know, the valley's pretty rural, but we have some population centers that are several 100,000 people or more, and the communities within those counties that have a large city are unfortunately impacted because they don't qualify under the rural definition. Could you speak to that for a moment?
2 things we were attempting to do to try to deal with that issue. One is our business and industry loan program. We are now allowing for investments in those communities if we can show that there is a direct benefit to smaller rural areas. So we've provided some flexibility in that program. Secondly, we're working now, looking at our portfolio to see if there's ways in which our loan portfolio, water loan portfolio, to see if we could use this as flexible to attract additional private sector investment in communities that often don't get attention.
All right, quickly, California was $54 billion last year at the farm gate. The dynamic, diverse 300 commodities in our agricultural industry. We farmers obviously are proud of that fact. And a lot of people don't realize that of all of those 300 commodities, dairy is the #1 effort. I want to thank you and the USDA's efforts to assist California. In the last Farm Bill, we gave the opportunity, if California dairymen voted by 2/3, to join the federal milk marketing order. Can you update us on the current status on that effort?
Information is being produced to make sure the transcript is accurate. That will then allow the parties to essentially brief it. Decision will be made, and assuming the decision is to move forward, the referendum will take place shortly thereafter.
Appreciate that. The dairy industry, as you know, is cyclical, and right now we're in a downtime with $12 per hundredweight milk prices and $14, $16 per hundredweight costs of input costs, and it's very tough. Let me finally ask you, can we expect, because out of that agricultural production, a lot of it in California is exported. It's $20.4 billion last year. The negotiations on the economic analysis on a sector-by-sector benefit to American agriculture, can we expect these analyses to be completed prior to the finalization before we vote on the TPP, these trade agreements?
I believe they will be, and there are already analysis available, whether it's the Peterson Institute or the recent Farm Bureau evaluation that was announced yesterday.
We're going to need that information, Mr. Chairman, and as we make our own evaluations on whether or not we're going to vote for that measure at the end of this year, and we appreciate that information, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. King for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony and your response to the questions here. I'm not going to have any about cotton, just to lead this. And but I would like to go just to a number of things. And as a very, very large percentage of the avian influenza that hit this country was not only Iowa, but was my district specifically, with something like 74% of the state of Iowa that was hit was in my district, and somewhere in the 60s overall for a while. At least was a national measure of the layer loss that we had. I want to say that I believe that the way the USDA has handled the turkey loss on AI has been, generally speaking, the strategy for it has been adequate, and the things that we've learned from that will make us better going forward. But I believe the disposal, for example, of turkeys and the composting in the building it manages it and handles it well. And we add to that the things we've learned. I think we're perhaps prepared for another debacle of that nature. However, with regard to the layers, I wanted to ask you about if you've made any changes in your strategy on disposal of layers, where we may have as many as 5 million birds on a location that need to be disposed of very, very quickly. That seemed to be the biggest problem that cropped up in this huge loss that we had, and if you've made any adjustments there in policy.
I would say we have, because we want to do it within a 24-hour period of time, so we're trying to speed up the process. And then secondly, we want to pre-position assets in terms of knowing whether landfills are available or other disposal methods on the farm, which we've been able to use in states where we think there's a potential for this to reemerge. So we are better prepared today than we were, obviously, when this hit last year.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring that up for the sake of us having a focus on that component, which was the most difficult, I believe, of all that we faced. The formula on the indemnity payments has been brought to my attention multiple times by layers, that the data that has been used on that by APHIS is older data, back as far as 2010 and 11 from the BEA. And so has that been brought to your attention in the past, and have you taken any steps or considered bringing that up to modern data and readjusting your formulas for our layers on indemnity?
Congressman, we have made changes to that indemnification process, and we will always be open to additional, more current data to make sure we're doing the right thing. I would caution that we want to make sure that it continues to be an indemnity effort as opposed to an insurance effort. I think if it's to be an insurance effort, that's something that you all have to decide when you craft the next Farm Bill.
And I would say putting together insurance on this is a very difficult proposition. We have looked at that as a means of representing my constituents, and if somebody can present a good formula for that, I'm very interested. It didn't go as smoothly as I had thought it might, or hoped it might, I should say. But then have you changed the formula? Because one of the things they're asking is that if you'd move from the 2002 to 2011 formula to the, just up 1 year even, to the 2003 to 2012 formula, it would change that gross margin deduction from an 85% margin down to an 80.5% margin. That would be a significant difference to our producers just to move up 1 year. Is that something that you've done or considered?
Changes have been made, Congressman, and I will get you the specifics on exactly how we made an effort to try to listen and adjust based on the information that was being provided to us by the industry.
And I'll provide you a fuller set of questions here, too, that will be helpful, I think, in responding to that. And I appreciate that. I also, it's my sense that we've got a pretty good handle on PED. Is that also your sense?
I'm sorry, and what?
On a pretty good handle on the PED virus?
Yes, although, you know, with these things, they can crop up at any point in time.
And that's exactly what I hope to hear, that our attention is on that, so that we remain prepared. And I think we've done a reasonable job of reacting to it and overcoming that challenge. Then also I wanted to point out to you into this record that we have contract growers, they're turkey producers. Still remains a collection of claims against one of the contractors that did some of the recovery work in my district, and I don't know how broad this goes. And so as some of these claims get put in a place where they're either a claim with APHIS or the contractor, and that's not definitive sometimes on who has the responsibility for that. And I wanted to bring this to your attention because I believe a list is coming to me very soon that aggregates these claims. I don't think it's a huge situation, but it's huge to the people that are affected by it. And I'd ask for your cooperation on that and perhaps collaboration if we could get that resolved and close the books on the avian influenza in my district.
Get us the list, Congressman, and we'll work with you.
I will do that, and I thank you for your testimony. I thank the chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Mr. McGovern for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Vilsack. Just being the last year of your term, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your incredible service. In particular, I want to thank you for the recent announcement that you and the White House made that would expand the summer feeding program, to get more kids into the summer feeding program, and I'm grateful for that, but more importantly, lots of poor children and their families are grateful for that. You know, we're talking about the rural economy here today, and I think, you know, while the overall economy is getting better, there are a lot of families still struggling, and in rural areas, SNAP is still a big issue. You know, we've had many hearings on SNAP in this committee, but one of the issues that has come up in the hearings on SNAP is the need to better connect veterans with nutritious foods. You know, we know that veterans, especially older veterans, suffer from a range of nutrition-related health conditions such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease. And these are conditions that can be treated, if you will, by increasing consumption of fruits and vegetables. So I'd love to work on better connecting veterans with farmers markets, perhaps through an incentive program where veterans receive vouchers at VA clinics to use farmers markets, or why not hold farmers markets at VA clinics? I mean, I think there's a lot of straightforward, simple steps that we can take to better connect the dots, and I hope that we can work with you and your department on that. But secondly, and you know, as I mentioned, we had many hearings. I think we've had 11 hearings on SNAP in this committee, and I'm not quite sure where they're all leading to, but I think something's up. We've heard talk about block grants. We've heard talk about more onerous, you know, work requirements. But most recently, a leading Republican introduced a bill that would let states drug test the poor as a condition to receiving SNAP. Similar laws in Florida and Georgia have been struck down as unconstitutional, and there's a growing body of evidence that shows that states with narrower drug testing laws in the books are spending thousands of dollars to identify very few drug users. In fact, those receiving public assistance actually test positive for illicit drugs at a lower rate than the general population. It's interesting to note that in that bill there's no requirement that corporate CEOs who receive government grants or subsidies be tested. There's no requirement that members of Congress be tested. Maybe there should be a requirement that members of Congress be tested. Maybe that might explain why we're doing some of the things that we're doing around here. But I'm concerned that this bill is nothing more than another attempt to demonize poor people and has no basis in reality, and I'm not sure how quickly we're going to see this, but I figured that we have this opportunity here today. I'd like to ask you to comment on this bill and receive your advice and guidance as we move forward.
Congressman, first of all, on the veterans issue, I would encourage you to take a look at the Farmers Market Promotion Grant Program and the Food Nutrition Incentive Program that were established under the 2014 Farm Bill as potential avenues today to finance what I think is a pretty good idea, and the idea of having farmers markets at VA clinics is an interesting one, and I'll take that back to our team. As I indicated to Congressman Matterholt when he proposed this in our appropriations hearing, this is not something that I think will significantly impact and affect the help and assistance that folks who are addicted need. It will also be, I think, quite damaging to the children of family members who might be negatively impacted by this. I'm not sure that it solves, I'm not sure what the problem is, and I'm not sure that it solves any problem, but it does indeed create a stigma, and it could, as you indicate, create a slippery slope in terms of precisely how many programs we're going to bring within this umbrella. You know, a more effective way of dealing with this issue, from my perspective, is taking a look at expanding prevention and education, expanding first responders' ability to respond to overdose situations so lives can be saved, providing more medical assistant treatment opportunities, and particularly specifically expanding access to services in rural areas. 76% of the shortage areas for behavioral science and substance abuse and mental illness treatment exist in rural areas. It is an area that requires attention and requires resources, and also calling upon the entire community, including the faith-based community, to help us create an atmosphere and an attitude in rural areas where people can feel free to acknowledge they have challenges and a problem, and to be able to get help and assistance and support through AA and Narcotics Anonymous and so forth. These are things I think would be more beneficial if it's really, if we're really interested in trying to help these people.
And let me just say thank you for heading up the President's efforts to deal with the opiate and substance abuse crisis that's going on in this country. We're all grateful for your leadership on that as well. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Austin Scott, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Vilsack, thank you for meeting with the Georgia delegation yesterday. And prior to that meeting, I was with another man who, in a similar position, who's now retired, and he said that anytime he wanted to submit something to the committee with a statement, that it had to go up the chain and be approved by the administration. Have you experienced that same system, if you will, with the administration, that if you're going to present something to the committee, that it has to be approved by people outside of your office?
You mean the responses I'm giving today?
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay, thank you for that. As respectfully as I can say it, I have serious concerns about some of the statements in the in what you've said. Today, the state of the agricultural economy remains sound despite lower commodity prices. Those are, to me, very much inconsistent. The administration's focus on economic recovery over the past 7 years has helped the majority of farm households improve their financial condition, and we expect that to continue as farm income faces increased pressure from lower commodity prices. And as we face increased pressure from lower commodity prices, that certainly hurts our financial condition. And it seems that if we want to expand the summer feeding program, and I'm not familiar with the details of that, but I do know that many of our kids, when school is out, they don't have food. And if that's consistent with your authority, I think we should take care of the kids. My church does that. We have backpacks for kids. The teachers put it together. The principals put it together at the end of the school year because we're concerned about our kids not having food when they go home. And then we have an issue like cotton, which is so important to the area that I represent. And it seems to me in reading the things that you do have the flexibility to do what we've been asking for with regard to cottonseed. And it just seems consistent with the administration that if it's something that they want, or if it's some of their supporters, they'll bend over backwards to make it happen. But cotton's a red state product. And now our farmers when we have a profit, the government takes 50% of it. When we die, the government takes 50% of our land. And now we're asking for a little bit of help just to get through some tough times. I would just appreciate if you'd use the same flexibility to support our cotton farmers as is being used to do the other things, like expanding the summer feeding program.
Well, I've got statutory authority to expand the summer feeding program. It's a mandatory program. I've got that authority. The authority I don't have is the EPT program, which we're asking in this budget to have authority to do. So we are asking Congress for permission to expand. We're not expanding it in that vein because we don't have permission to do it. That's the issue.
how are lower commodity prices good for the farm economy?
Well,
That's what your statement
no,
says.
no, that's not what we're saying, Congressman. That's a misstatement of what we're saying and a mischaracterization of what we're saying. I think what we're saying is that we're wanting to make sure that people do not feel that we're in the same circumstances that we were in the 1980s, because we're not.
Mr. Secretary,
And we're not because there's a stronger safety net. We're not because the debt-to-equity ratio is much stronger, much more stable. We're not because of the level of bankruptcy filings. If you look at the data, it's going to suggest to you that we're in a softened period, no question. We want to increase demand. That's why trade agreements are important.
Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry, I need to I'm down to one minute, and I need to reclaim that time. You said in 2016, you forecast additional increases in median income, farm household income across all farm types. But at the same time, we're fighting these commodity prices. And I want to get to a specific with the USDA and EPA. And this is a case where the USDA has very much done their job, and I appreciate it. Ms. McCarthy, a couple of weeks ago, I asked her a question about some of the chemicals that you have approved. Your job is, you've done your job. You've approved new biotech traits to give farmers a leg up on weed resistance challenges. Have you spoken with the counterparts at the EPA and asked them why they haven't or when potentially they will? I mean, we start planning in a couple of weeks.
We're in a situation where we have a convoluted framework when it comes to biotechnology crops, if that's what you're asking about, Congressman. I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
It's not the crop, it's the chemicals that we use on the
Okay. We're in constant contact with them, encouraging them and explaining the impact that their decisions may or may not have on folks in the countryside. Obviously, I don't run that agency, so I can't dictate to that agency, but I can certainly encourage them, and we do.
I'm out of time. If I can make one final point. Secretary Vilsack, the people in the USDA know when we plant cotton, though. Your people know about agriculture. You know when we plant cotton. Ms. McCarthy had no idea when cotton was planted. I mean, she doesn't know that we need these products now. And so that's where we could use some help there, is getting the EPA to go ahead and approve the products that you've already approved. We're starting to plant in a couple of weeks.
They go through their process, Congressman, and we'll encourage them to speed up as best they can.
Gentleman's time's expired. Ms. Delbini?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And I also want to thank you and your staff for coming out to my district and meeting with so many of our farmers. I just met with some of them earlier this week, and they continue to comment about how much they appreciate you coming out and talking with them. As you know, I introduced a bill last Congress that was the basis for the SNAP employment and training program, pilot programs that were in the Farm Bill. And the end result was the $200 million program that you have started. Washington State has had a fantastic success with ENT program, and it's helped participants achieve self-sufficiency. And part of the criteria we wrote for awarding these programs was making sure that we had folks like the programs in that Washington State put in place in mind. I wondered if you could comment on the breadth of the various proposals that are moving forward right now and any impact you see on ENT going forward.
It's a 3-year program, and we're in the process of ensuring prompt implementation. The 10 pilot projects basically are looking at different aspects. There are some aspects that are looking at how additional assistance and financial assistance might allow for transition into a job so that you don't lose benefits. Some are looking at ways in which those who face barriers, transportation barriers, for example, could be assisted. Others are looking at ways in which folks could be trained for the jobs that are actually existing in an improved economy so that they can take advantage of those new job opportunities. Some are taking a look at ways in which the veterans can be assisted and helped. So it is a broad spectrum here. We're trying to identify best practices so that those best practices can then be implemented in all 50 states, so we do a much better job of using the resources that are being provided. The sad reality today still is that states don't use all of the 50-50 money in terms of the employment and training. They're happy to use the 100% federal money, but when it goes to putting a little skin in the game, fewer states than we would like are willing to do that. And
Do you know what we could do to incentivize folks to do more there?
Well, I think you can say that it's a joint responsibility, and it's in our best interest to put people to work in jobs that matter, and it's in our best interest and their best interest to try to get them to a point where they don't need as much assistance. But states are dealing with, their budget challenges as well, and this is unfortunately not as high a priority for some states as it ought to be in our view.
Thank you. Moving to a different subject, last year's fire season was one of the worst of recent memory for the Pacific Northwest. We have to end fire borrowing. And each time this happens, the Forest Service ends up transferring many funds away that are used to help maintain our forests. And you've been an outspoken supporter of the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act, and which I and many other parties have co-sponsored. We know how badly this reform is needed. And so I just wondered, from your perspective, what do we need to do to get past the stalemate and move forward?
Well, I don't intend to transfer the monies. We spent 62% of our budget last year fighting fires. This is a problem that everybody in Congress understands needs to be fixed. It just needs to get done. And the reality is, by not getting it done, we're robbing opportunity, we're reducing job opportunities, we're making it difficult for mills to stay in existence, we're making it difficult for people to enjoy the forests in the way in which I think all of us would want them to enjoy. We've bailed them out. We bail folks out year after year after year, so I've instructed the Forest Service to do what they can to spend the money in the hopes that Congress, either you all have appropriated the right amount, but if you haven't, you need to fix this problem. We are not a fire department. We are a Forest Service.
No, well, thank you. I agree with you. I think we need to fix this problem soon, and appreciate your help in doing that. One last quick question. One issue that was brought up when you visited my district was the lack of crop insurance for aquaculture. And I know your staff recently met with one of the tribal chairmen from my district who asked that question. And I just want to ask for your commitment to continue working with us to ensure that this very critical and overlooked aspect of our agriculture system is protected in the future.
We are, and it's very consistent with the fact that in this administration we've expanded the number of crop insurance products, or number of crops covered by crop insurance, and we've also significantly improved the reimbursement levels for some of our high-value specialty crops.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Goodlatte, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I want to ask a question on behalf of my colleague, Ms. Lummis from Wyoming. In 2013, the GAO Trails Maintenance Report confirmed that the U.S. Forest Service has over $314 million in deferred trails maintenance. Do you believe that it's important for Congress to weigh in on this framework that the Forest Service is developing that will address National Forest System trail concerns in a comprehensive manner?
Yes, but it's going to require resources, which means you need to fix the fire budget.
And could volunteers help improve trails in a significant portion of the George Washington National Forest?
There were in this administration, over 600,000 volunteers have already been encouraged to participate in those kinds of activities. We also have the 21 CSC program, which is providing nearly 11,000 additional folks, including returning veterans. The reality is that we could do a lot more if we had stability and certainty in terms of our budget. We do not have that because of the fire suppression costs. It's got to get fixed, Congressman. I mean, I don't know how many times it's got to get fixed. Otherwise, we'll be having this conversation, you'll be having this conversation with the next secretary and the next secretary and the next secretary until there is no trail maintenance costs, because it's going to be eaten up by the fire budget.
Well, we certainly understand that, and we could go deeper into that too in terms of the administration's policy with regard to harvesting timber, because that is one of the best tools to avoid the kind of catastrophic fires that we've been experiencing.
We've harvested 20% more timber in this administration than the previous administration, and we'd be able to do more if you fix the fire budget.
We encourage you to keep doing that, and do it in a way that you can market that timber so that you can raise some money to continue to harvest more and fix the trails. But we will take your advice to heart. We understand the nature of that problem. I want to talk to you about two other issues. One I know is importance to you and that you're familiar with. We understand that USDA's Biofuels Infrastructure Partnership will be providing $100 million in grant funds for the installation of biofuel blender pumps in 21 states. Considering that for the last 10 years, consumers have already been forced to foot the bill for the higher levels of ethanol blended into their gasoline, is it fair to ask them to pay another $100 million in order to prop up the ethanol industry?
21 states participate in this program. They match the $100 million with $120 million of commitments. We anticipate and expect over 5,000 additional distribution systems being put in those 21 states, so there's a lot of interest in this program.
I know, but it's also not market forces determining this. It is the government determining how this money is going to be spent. I just mentioned that the ethanol industry already benefits from a unique mandate, which essentially forces the American people to buy their product. Therefore, I fail to see any reason to actually increase the amount of support this industry is given.
Well, 450,000 jobs that are directly or indirectly affected by this industry, the fact that gas is less expensive because of it, the fact that we have better...
I'm not, Mr. Secretary, I would challenge whether
benefits.
gas is less expensive because of it. Gas is less expensive right now because of international production of gas.
That's also part of it, Congressman, but you can't deny the fact that study after study shows that this industry has indeed, over time, reduced the cost of gas to consumers.
Actually, no, I don't agree with that because
University of California, Davis did a study.
Mr. Chairman, the time is mine. Let me just say in response to that, Mr. Secretary, that the fact of the matter is that there have been a number of occasions in the past few years when, because of the demand imposed by these ethanol mandates on corn production, has caused the price of corn to spike, and because consumer driving habits have changed, the amount of oil consumed for that purpose that's dropped. The net effect has been that the industry has had to buy RINs, have to buy credits in order to be able to stay in the market. And those credits are, in fact, causing, on some occasions, both the price of food and the price of fuel to go up at the same time.
There is no correlation, Congressman, on the food costs. That is just not accurate. And the reason it's not accurate is because we've increased corn production, and farmers get today, unfortunately, a fairly small amount of the food dollar, about 18 cents. There is no correlation between food cost increases and ethanol.
I strongly disagree, but let me get one more question in, if I may. Farmers in my district have contacted me about letters they've received from the NRCS which claim that the farmer received, quote, improper payments from NRCS conservation programs. I understand that this situation arose after USDA discovered discrepancies with farmers' Data Universal Numbering System, DUNS number, and current registration in the System of Award Management, SAM database. And I'm told that this system has been in place since 2011, but that the USDA has just recently begun to verify if a farmer's DUNS number is correct and SAM registration is current. Will a producer really have to pay back many years of conservation program payments?
We have created a number of waiver programs and are working with producers who feel that this is inaccurate or unfair. And we've, on 2 different tranches, have millions of dollars of assistance has been provided, Congressman. So there is a waiver process. There is a process for the farmer to raise questions about the fairness of this, and if it's unfair, we won't do it. But
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Required.
We agree on one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman's time's expired. Ms. Custer, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Vilsack, for being with us. I want to also commend you on your leadership on the heroin crisis, and just remind my colleagues that we have a co-chair bipartisan task force to combat the heroin epidemic in particularly rural economies. My state of New Hampshire has been hit very hard. We've got a number of bills that we're going to be recommending, and I'd love to be able to run that by you and your staff and engage with you as we go forward. A couple of quick questions. One that I hear often in New Hampshire is, as I go around visiting my farmers and holding roundtables, is about the margin protection program. And the particular issue for us, we're sort of at the end of the pipeline, if you will. This happens to us in energy, and it's happening to us in the cost of feed, so that the equation between the price for milk and the cost of feed, we're being squeezed very, very hard in New England and New Hampshire in particular. I'm just wondering if you have any comment on that and how this program is going generally. I understand 50% of farmers, dairy farmers, are participating. Do you have any feedback on how it's going?
A small number of farmers received payments last year. Depending upon what happens, the farmers with $8 and $7 protection may see some payments this year. It's expected. I think there is a need, as Congress considers the new Farm Bill, to discuss the current state, which does not give us the flexibility and the ability to regionalize those feed costs. I think under the circumstances, as we listen to folks, that's something that should be addressed in the next Farm Bill, or if there's an opportunity to address it before, fair enough. But it's not something we can do from a regulatory perspective, but it is something that I think is a fair concern. There are significant differences in feed costs, and that needs to be factored into the program in order for it to work. And you're correct, roughly 50% of the producers are participating, and of that 50%, about 55% purchased higher coverage, the $6, $7, $8 coverage.
All right, great. So I'll follow up with colleagues about that regional difference on the feed costs. The other role that I have is co-chair of the Congressional Biomass Caucus, and we did have the EPA administrator in here, and I had the chance to ask her about considering biomass as a renewable fuel and what that means for our rural communities and timber interests, et cetera. Could you comment on any additional members? I know USDA has been a strong supporter. I really appreciate that. Anything else that you might add about biomass and the future for the biomass industry in our rural communities?
Well, biomass studies have been conducted by the Department of Energy showing that there's a significant amount of opportunity here. 1 billion tons, I think, is the most recent estimate. And we are looking at ways through our biomass centers, which are research centers throughout the entire country, to look for ways in which we could create the appropriate supply chain for each region of the country where whatever their specific biomass opportunity is, that they can access it and utilize it. We're also investing in resources through the 9005 program, which is advanced biofuel production, providing assistance to about 320 companies to produce biofuel from biomass. And we're also continuing to look for opportunities to invest in our loan guarantee program, 9003, in a variety of different feedstocks so that we have a broad range. The last thing I would say is there's tremendous opportunity for the Defense Department in terms of biofuel. The Navy wants to have half of their fuel basically being bio-based and domestically produced. I was privileged enough to be on a destroyer watching it being refueled with beef tallow fuel out in the Pacific Theater just a couple of weeks ago. So there are terrific opportunities. The last thing is commercial aviation is also extremely interested in this fuel, and there are roughly 40 airports that sell 90% of the jet fuel, and they are extremely interested in doing this because of the emissions and the benefit from the emissions to meet international standards. And it's a 17 to 19 billion gallon market opportunity for us. So there's plenty of opportunity.
Wonderful. And one last quick question. Quick plug for your rural development program. It's been fantastic in higher education, community colleges, affordable housing, homeless veterans. We're using it every chance we get. And a shout out to Ted Brady and your operation who covers Vermont and New Hampshire, doing a fantastic job. Wanted to ask you about the affordable housing in rural communities. We have legislation. We're working with your staff, but I just want my colleagues essentially to know about a bill. There's a program that's coming to an end, and we ran into a situation of folks were going to lose their affordable housing, and we're working with you. We do need legislation, I think, going forward, and I'll stay in touch with my colleagues to make sure that rural communities continue to have access to affordable housing.
It's multi-housing, and part of that problem has been solved by the budget process, but the other part is that as multi-family housing that has received assistance from the USDA has their loans paid off,
yes,
those units basically will go out of the system, and we expect and anticipate 75% of those units could potentially be out of the system in the next 10 to 15 years.
That's my fear.
Beginning in the very near future, so it is an issue.
We need to change the incentives to try to keep people in that in that program.
Creative voucher system.
Thank you very much.
Gentlelady's
Mr.
time
Chair.
has expired. Mr. Crawford, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as you know, China is forecast to hold over 60 million bales of cotton in reserves in 2016, 6 times the level they held before implementing their reserve program 5 years ago. Despite their reckless actions, India's own minimum support price has now resulted in India overtaking China as the world's largest cotton producer. And if that weren't bad enough, Turkey has seemingly concluded their purely retaliatory anti-dumping case against the U.S. that clearly violates WTO procedure. All of this leading to the lowest cotton plantings in the United States in 108 years, with the exception of 1 year in the 80s. And if that wasn't bad enough, add insult to injury, China is now dealing with their huge stockpile by shrinking their imports from 24.5 million bales in 2011 to an estimated 5 million bales in 2016. That's an 80% drop. Yet in February, on February 11th, an appearance before the Appropriations Committee, you said you were refusing to help cotton growers because you don't want to, quote, create difficulties for the industry relative to trade. I find that statement to be outrageous. Do you share our concerns that your refusal to act threatens U.S. cotton production and the very trade you say you're trying to protect?
Congressman, that refers to the fact that Brazil brought a WTO case against us based on our cotton program as it existed before. They are very, very skeptical of anything we do in this space, so you have to be careful that you don't encourage Brazil to yet provide another case. Their case, which they won, exposed us to potentially $800 to $900 million of retaliation against crops throughout the entire agricultural sector. So, yes, I am concerned about that, and I should be. That's part of my job.
In your view,
that's not to suggest that I'm not sympathetic with you in terms of your concerns about China. They're legitimate.
Do you think China and India's actions with respect to cotton violate their commitments in the WTO? And if so, what's USDA and USTR doing about it?
Well, I think that the Trade Representative's Office is very acutely aware of this. It has expressed concerns to both India and China. And I think the fact that they are already bringing cases in a number of areas indicates a willingness to take these folks on. There is a limitation in terms of the number of cases that they can handle from a staffing perspective. And we're certainly going to continue to encourage them to put pressure, and we'll continue to put pressure on China. They are very difficult to deal with in a lot of areas, not just cotton.
Understood. Perhaps your department could use further counsel on trade issues, given your comments to the appropriators. In fact, the lack of a top trade advisor in the department was contemplated by this committee in the Farm Bill. That's why we authorized your department the appointment of an undersecretary of trade. Why haven't you appointed one yet?
Congress has requested on 2 separate occasions that we study the issue, which we're in the process of following the congressional mandate and direction.
Okay, let me switch gears. My colleague, Mr. Goodlatte, referenced the Duns and Sam issue, and I appreciate your response to that. I would like to go a little further and say that the loss of payments on those contracts has created a huge cash flow problem for many of the farmers across the country, and some of them are in trouble with their lenders. Can we get your assurances today in writing so that they can provide the affected farmers and their lenders with some peace of mind on that issue?
Congressman, over $24 million has been funneled through this waiver process, and that's the process that we are using to make sure that we are doing this properly.
I understand that, but in the interim, you have lenders that are they're having to carry their farmers. We have farmers that are trying to make payments, and they're $80,000 short because they haven't been paid. Is there something, even a piece of paper, that you could provide those farmers that they could go to their bankers and say, we're good?
Congressman, if you give me the names of those farmers, I'll be happy to take a look and make sure that whatever we're doing does not jeopardize a situation for an unreasonable.
I'd be happy to give you the names of those farmers, and a written response to you I'm sure would allay their concerns. With that, I yield back.
Yields back. Mr. Waltz, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. More importantly, thank you for being a strong voice for rural America. And I understand my colleague, Mr. King, already addressed the issue of avian flu, but I think it's important to pass on to you how appreciative we are in the response last year, catastrophic economically and psychologically to our communities out there. And I think your willingness to get on the front end, we have a lot of people feel more confident that come spring, should we experience it again, we're ready. So I'm grateful for that. I want to go back to an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and I think A little contrast to my colleague from Virginia is Biofuels. We're very proud of the industry that you've done. You've created markets for our growers out there. You've created homegrown American fuel. You've created jobs where someone can go from Preston High School to get a degree at the University of Minnesota in engineering and chemistry and come back home and work and produce fuel, jobs in those communities. I understand that if the desire to see clear burning fuels isn't a priority based on the science, you may ignore that. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of us do see that as a need. When I go down there and I see these plants, I see the jobs there, I see the trucks coming in with the market for the local producers. One thing I don't see is I don't see a U.S. naval carrier battle group protecting the shipping lanes down there like we see when we import oil. And I think we need to have an honest conversation. The facts that you were giving were correct on the reduction of the import of foreign oil, reduction in carbon emissions, the number of jobs being created, and the fact of the matter is access barriers to the market have been created with artificial blend walls and the inability for people to make a choice at the pump. If I want to turn it to E15 and I want to use that, we can get there. So I'd like you to use the remainder of my time, Secretary, because I think you've proven this not just in rhetoric, but you've created jobs out there by your leadership in this. What's your vision and what's the state of the biofuels industry now, and where do you see us in 10 years down the road, assuming we can give the certainty that every market should expect from us, and biofuels no different?
Congressman, I think the ability to maintain a strong and vibrant rural economy is dependent on our capacity to diversify and to create new opportunities to complement production, agriculture, and exports, which has been the traditional way of supporting rural America. In my lifetime, agricultural production has increased by 170%, even though the inputs have been relatively stable. That's producing 170% more on 26% less land with 22 million fewer farmers. The challenge that we have in rural areas is that as we were getting fewer and fewer farmers and becoming more efficient with production agriculture, we didn't overlay that with a complementary economy that would allow folks to live, work, and raise their families in small communities. We're now doing that, and part of that is the bioeconomy, and part of it, what you mentioned, is the biofuel piece of this. There's also the bioenergy piece of it, where we're seeing people converting biomass into energy. We're seeing dairy producers creating digesters that are producing methane and converting it into power. We're beginning to see chemicals and materials being produced, and we're beginning to see manufacturing come back in small towns. You complement that with a local and regional food system and a creative use of conservation, and you've got more stimulation going on in your economy. The biofuel industry has been helpful not just in the Midwest now, it's now expanding to the Northwest. There's very great interest in the commercial aviation piece of this. As I mentioned earlier, it's happening in the South with woody biomass and with perennial grasses. It's even beginning to percolate a little bit in Texas and Oklahoma. I'm surprised that Texas was one of the aggressive users of this biofuel blender pump program. In fact, I think they might have been the largest recipient in terms of dollars. So it's something people like, it's something people want, it's helping to create jobs, it is in fact reducing the cost of gas over time, it's reducing emissions. During the last 15 years, it's taken 124 million car emissions off the road that otherwise would have been on the road. It's reducing our trade deficit. It's helping to reduce our reliance on foreign oil. By no means the only reason we're reducing it, but it's part of the reason. And it's helping to diversify the economy. And it's creating the jobs that so many producers today have. If you look at the way in which farm income is generated, part of it's generated from the farm, and a good part of it's also generated from off-farm income. And so many families have a spouse or the farmer themselves who are employed. And the result is that's why the median family farm household income is high, even though our farm income has come down. And you have to kind of look at the data that it's beginning to work, and we want to make sure we continue to expand those opportunities.
Well, thank you for that, and we appreciate it. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Pleasure late, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary, for appearing before us so often. And wanted to acknowledge that one of our great leaders in Tennessee, Farm Bureau, Lacey Upchurch, is retired. I know you had a lot of respect for Lacey. And we're happy to welcome the new president of Tennessee Farm Bureau today, Jeff Akins, to Washington. Had the opportunity to visit with him earlier this morning, and he and I share a similar concern. We know that the USDA website has a mission statement of help rural America thrive, but we both share the concern in the President's new budget after the ag community essentially, in an attempt to do their part in cutting spending in Washington, gave up direct payments, is now seeing the President propose a 20% cut to crop insurance. How do you feel about the President's proposal, and have you spoken with him about it?
Well, part of the proposal is focused on preventative planning concerns that have been raised by both the General Accounting Office, who's your congressional arm, and by our own Inspector General. And so I think it's appropriate and necessary for us to be responsive to the concerns that are raised by these oversight and accountability organizations when they raise concerns about how that program is being run and the cost to taxpayers. The second area has to do with price harvest loss issues and the amount of subsidy for that. It's currently 62%. The President suggested that perhaps it would be appropriate at 50%. A fair deal to taxpayers, farmers, and insurance. And all of this is in the context of a very constrained budget. The budget I'm working with today, from an operating standpoint, is less than it was the first full year the President submitted a budget. When you place artificial restrictions and caps on budgets, you've got to make choices. So if it's not in that space, is it in the conservation space you want me to make that choice? Is it in the farm loan space you want me to make that choice? Is it in the rural development job creation space you want me to make that choice? Is it in the food safety place you want me to make that choice? It is ultimately about these choices. And they're not easy, they're very difficult, and you all understand that because you have to make choices throughout the entire budget, and you have to prioritize. And we obviously have, everyone's got a different set of priorities, and that's what makes this process interesting to watch. And you all will speak, you'll create a budget, and the next secretary will live with that budget. But the reality is it's less than it was, but yet I can show you that we're doing a records amount of work both in virtually every mission area.
Shifting to the waters of the U.S. for a minute, we know that 31 states and organizations have filed a lawsuit against the rule. Associates who represent rural America, like the Farm Bureau, National Cattlemen's, National Corn Growers, National Pork Producers, U.S. Poultry and Egg Association, just to name a few, basically organizations that share the USDA's mission of helping rural America thrive, are all calling for the administration to scrap this rule, start over, and develop a rule with meaningful input from state and local stockholders. What input did the USDA have on this rule or provide on the rule?
We have an advisory process in which we advise EPA on our view of the impact and effect of what they're considering. Obviously, we don't dictate what a sister agency does, and obviously courts are going to decide based on the injunction that currently is in place what's going to happen with that rule.
Are you supportive of the EPA's rule in its current
I would say this.
form?
I would say this. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about what the rule is and what the rule isn't, which is why I encouraged the administrator to get out and encouraged her teams to get out and visit with farmers and have farmers be able to see what it covers and what it doesn't cover.
And she was here in this committee, as you probably know, just a week or two ago. Gina McCarthy, is that who you're referring to?
I'm sorry, what?
Or were you referring to Gina McCarthy getting out?
Yes.
Okay.
And her teams to basically create a situation in which farmers could bring information about their individual operations to EPA administrators so that they could say this is in, this is out, because there is, I think, some confusion. It's a very difficult circumstance, and I understand that farmers are very, very concerned. And I think if there was more communication, there might be a little less concern.
Okay. Well, I think it's pretty clear that they've spoken the 31 lawsuits, all the organizations that have brought this forward. It is not very clear. Just the definition of a ditch could take an hour to go through. So, I mean, it's not clear, and you have the President's ear on this, and we would hope that representing the ag community, you would be on the side of all the stakeholders who have spoken so loudly to have this rule scrapped, and let's start over, because it was not done in a proper fashion through the rulemaking process. And I thank you for your time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Lujan Grisham, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. It's nice to have you before the committee again, and appreciate, as always, your efforts for rural economic development investments, and given the nature of my state and our current economic condition, which is severe, I appreciate all those investments and all that you're doing. But I really want to talk about what more we could do, given the fact that 9 counties out of the 33 counties in my state have above 20% poverty, and that poverty rate has been persistent over a 30-year period. Given that, recognizing that we have those issues and conditions around the country, in 2009, we wanted 10% of those rural economic development investments to go to these areas of persistent poverty. That expired in 2013. So I'm interested really in 2 things. Did that mandate or set aside, however we want to identify that, did that have an impact? And if it did, do we need to maybe do that again? And if it didn't, what things do you think and do you recommend that we could be doing? Because in spite of those economic development efforts, New Mexico and others are still really lagging behind, and I want to work with every stakeholder and every policymaker to make sure that New Mexico gets what it needs to end this persistent poverty in our rural and frontier areas.
Congresswoman, I think what we measure, we do. Or what we create as goals, we strive to accomplish. The goal of 10%, we actually at USDA decided that that was not ambitious enough. We looked at 20% initially of resources being spent in those counties that have been dealing with persistent poverty. I can tell you that as of last year, 22% of our resources were invested in those counties. And now we're focused on potentially moving that up. We also have created Strike Force, which ensures that we have a coordinated effort within USDA to make sure that we are working with community building organizations to identify the current needs as it's seen at the local level, not based on what we think is appropriate. And as a result of Strike Force in over 900 counties, $23.6 billion has been invested in 190,000 different investments, everything from single-family housing loans to conservation efforts, farm loans. We then extended that effort through the Rural Council the President set up, the first ever, and now we are focused not just on creating economic opportunity, but also trying to mitigate the impacts of poverty through our Rural Child Poverty Initiative. We're taking a look at best practices in terms of a 2-generation approach. We just had a conference with the National Association of County Officers and Officials, NACO, and we've challenged 100 counties to work with us to create programs and strategic plans.
Right, and the hard part is, and I don't disagree with any of your statements about the strike force, about meeting and exceeding your goals, but looking at the outcomes just in my backyard, they're not there, and we've been cost shifting as a state to the counties who I think I've convinced in my state to declare behavioral health emergencies in their local areas to see if we can't trigger a larger public health emergency in the state, because I haven't gotten any federal support to deal with that, and the state support is gone. We're the only state in the country, which is not your issue per se at all, that doesn't have a behavioral health infrastructure anymore. It's completely gone. So do you see a way to take the strike force idea and to leverage that with other federal investments, given your relationship and expertise in rural economic development?
That's what we're doing with the Rural Council. We have telemedicine cooperatives with HHS. We have a Veterans Blue Button initiative with the Veterans Affairs. But I would say on the mental health behavioral service area, we do fund mental health clinics through USDA, through the Community Facility Grant Loan Program. And in fact, I think we funded $23 million worth of those in the last couple of years. So it may be something that we can work with you on.
That sounds great. I will definitely, and I've got just a few seconds left to work with you on that, Mr. Secretary, so thank you very much. I also want to encourage you to, I hope, reach a favorable decision to help New Mexico's dairy producers, given our dairy loss related to the huge snowstorm that we had in early January. The state declared an emergency, and we've written to you as a delegation, and we're hoping for a favorable reply as soon as possible.
Your producers qualify for the Disaster Assistance Program, and the way in which that turned out, they can actually qualify either in 2015 or 16. a secretarial designation isn't going to be providing the kind of help that you all want, but there is an administrative process that you all can go through in terms of building and equipment losses. So we'll be glad to work with you on that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ladies, time has expired. Dr. Benishek, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vilsack, for being here today. I just want to touch on a few things. You've had a wide variety of issues discussed here today, but I want to talk a little bit about the Forest Service. And believe me, I agree with you on the emergency fire spending. That has the problem we have to be fixed. But I still question how sales within the forests are conducted and done that could be done better. I spent a lot of time in rural Michigan, and we have 3 federal forests, and I talk to people who work in the forest all the time, and I understand that you could have better budgets. One of my problems understanding it is that when you sell trees, you make money, and yet there's no money to do the sales. That's the argument I've heard before from the Forest Service. But the people that actually do the harvesting, the contractors, the loggers, they tell me that they can't get a sale done because the way the sales are let. I mean, it's too big of a project. There's not enough smaller projects so that the average logger in the area can actually do the project. And a lot of the sales just don't get done for reasons like that. Not so much the lack of funds, but just the lack of adequate planning of the sale. Can you comment about that, Mr. Vilsack?
Well, we actually have increased sales, and our goal is higher this year than last year, and our goal was higher last year than the year before, and we've been making a steady increase in the number of board feet that are being treated.
I guess we're just not, one of my forests has seen that, but the other 2 forests hasn't. Maybe it's a local person, or?
No.
I don't understand why, for example, like I told you, they're trying to sell, a 1,000-acre sale. Well, the guys that do these bids, they can't do a 1,000-acre sale. They don't have that many guys to do it. They can't comply with all the rules. Is there a way that it could be done so that the local loggers could actually bid on these jobs?
Well, we can work with you on this issue. I would say that many of these contracts also, you mentioned staffing, and you might not think that that's an issue, but it actually is. There's staffing involved in all of these contracts. There's analysis that has to be done, and the reality is because of the fire budget, we've reduced the staffing of that team, of that staff.
Well, I understand that, and believe me, I would be willing to work with you on fixing these silos of money so that you can actually use the money that you get from a sale to actually continue to do more work on that.
There's a 50% reduction in the staff, Congressman. 50% reduction in the staff.
No, I agree that we need to fix the fire issue. But what I'm telling you is that just the example that I gave you of a bid being let that nobody in the area can actually bid on. So somebody actually let that bid. They proposed that bid, but the staff didn't make it in a way that the people who actually do the logging in the area could bid on it. So that's not really not having staff.
Well, that's why
the staff not doing it right.
That's why I say I'm happy to work with you on that issue. I mean, that's a fair concern. And if we're not structuring these in a way that fits the terrain or fits the forest, then that's a problem on us. And I'm happy to take that back.
Well, I would really like to work with that, because I hear that all the time, to tell you the truth. I mean, that's the issue, not the issue that they're not getting bid. The bids aren't working. I just want to bring up one more thing. The Forest Service have a line item, as I understand it, for land acquisition? Isn't there a way that we could use that money a little bit smarter than acquiring more land, Mr. Vilsack? Secretary Vilsack, you know what I mean?
To acquire more land?
Yeah.
Well, there are some folks who don't want us to acquire a lot of land. So
I think we should manage the land you have instead of acquiring more. So, you know what percentage of that line item in the budget is actually being used?
It's a really small amount. It's a really small amount in terms of the overall budget. Very, very small amount. And And oftentimes, the only time it's used is basically infill so that it makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that kind of stuff, but I would like a little bit more detail. Maybe your staff can
We'll get you
provide
detail.
that for me.
We'll get you detail.
going forward, okay, in the next month or something, okay?
We'll get you that.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Gentleman yields back, and I now recognize Mr. Davis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to see you again. Thanks for being here. This past November, the FDA published guidance on voluntary labeling of products of biotechnology and once again affirmed the government's position that there is no scientific justification or government interest in mandating on package labeling of products of biotech. The food industry has recently announced the development of a voluntary smart label specifically designed to provide consumers with this information. I assume the USDA is consistent with the FDA's position in support of voluntary labeling?
Congressman, we're working with the industry to try to resolve the dilemma that we're facing in the very, very near future with the implementation of the Vermont law. That is going to create chaotic circumstance and situation. It requires some kind of adjustment and some kind of national approach to this, so we don't have 50 different state efforts and we don't have individual companies like Campbell's making the decision that we're going to go ahead and do what we want to do. We want some standardization of this. So I don't want to be cute about this, but I think what the FDA has resolved is fine, but the reality is we're confronted with this circumstance that could create real chaos in the market. We need to get this thing fixed.
Well, you answered both of my follow-up questions. I completely agree with you. I think we do need a national standard, and I'm willing to work with you and your agency to help make that argument as we move forward. So thank you on that.
Here's the biggest point that Congress is going to have to decide. I don't think there's any question that people can probably reach an agreement that there needs to be some kind of time period between now and fill in the blank, 2 years, 3 years, 5, whatever the time period is, in which the industry will do the job of educating consumers about how they can access information about what's in their food, a 1-800 number, a website, the smart label. At the end of that period, what happens? If there's consumer understanding and acceptance, you don't need to worry about what's on the package. If there's not, what happens? And that's the issue that ultimately has to be decided.
I agree with you, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to move on to another subject. Last week, I asked Administrator McCarthy about the progress the EPA is making to establish the new ag-related standing committee of the Science Advisory Board, which, as you know, was enacted as part of the 2014 Farm Bill. The administrator informed me that as recently as 2 weeks ago, EPA met with the USDA to finalize that standing committee. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the administrator's commitment. And as the EPA consults with you on, and also members of this vital committee, the ag community needs the USDA to weigh in with its expertise and guidance, and I look forward to partnering with you to finalize that process. Now, my last line of questioning is in regards to pesticides. Federal laws dictate that the USDA serve as an important advisor to the EPA in the regulation of pesticides. Historically, your agency and their expertise and advice has been evident in the actions the EPA has taken to evaluate pesticides and their uses. USDA's perspective and knowledge of production agriculture truly, Mr. Secretary, is critical. However, it's concerning to hear from the farm community because they express increasingly urgent concerns about EPA's failure to meaningfully consider your expertise, advice, and opinions, especially during the formal interagency review. Can you give us a quick summary of how do you interact with the EPA when we deal with issues such as the neonic seed treatments on soybean production?
It's a situation where our technical experts and expertise communicate to EPA the concerns with whatever EPA is proposing and suggesting, and basically advising what we believe will be the impact and effect in the countryside on what they're considering, and encouraging them if there is going to be a significant impact for them to reassess their approach. It's advisory. Obviously, it's not dictating, it's advisory. So we have that constant communication. Sometimes, depending upon the nature of the issue, my senior staff may elevate to the senior staff if there's a very serious disagreement or a serious concern, and at times it can also elevate even higher. But it's a process of communication at various levels.
Well, specifically in regards to the recent study that recent release that the EPA put out in regards of the benefits analysis for seed treatments on soybeans. Did that get elevated to the senior staff level? Were there concerns at the USDA? Do you feel your expertise was actually utilized in this release?
You know, that's a difficult question for me to answer. It's not something that was discussed with me, but it may very well have elevated to the senior staff and been resolved at the senior staff level, or basically sometimes we have to agree to disagree.
Well, I'm out of time. I yield back whatever balance I don't
Chairman yields
have.
back his time. Mr. Allen, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here this morning, and thank you also for meeting with our Georgia members and Senate yesterday. Just wanted to clarify one thing. I think that Congressman Scott had asked you about the co-share program. For some reason yesterday, and I wrote it down in my notes, but we were talking about $300 million yesterday, and you mentioned $150 million today. Which could you clarify what you think that program might benefit?
I mentioned both figures yesterday. $300 million is the total cost we estimate of ginning costs.
Okay.
150 would be the 50% cost share that had been discussed.
All right, good. Thanks for clarifying that. Also, you know, since our meeting yesterday, I've had a difficult time. I've met with dozens of our colleagues, both here on the committee and also with our colleagues over in appropriations and our industry leaders. And the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, you mentioned that the appropriators took away your broad authority to provide assistance under Section 32 of the CCC Charter Act. When did they do that, and why did they do that?
They have been whittling away on that for the last couple of years. I think there were concerns about the ways in which we were utilizing that authority to help farmers and producers during difficult times for particular segments and particular aspects of agriculture. So they have a blanket restriction. And you know, the reality is that when you have a blanket restriction, you have situations like this where there is a need for flexibility, and I don't have it. And I would also say, Congressman, that, as I said earlier, fine, if they have concerns about me, but they have to understand that this appropriations bill is more likely going to be impacting the next secretary, so they ought to at least give the next secretary the flexibility.
Exactly, and of course that's been since FY 212 that it's included a right of preventing you from using that. And in talking to the appropriators, many of them believe that it was because of a Senate race in Arkansas and the providing assistance there to, I mean, is any truth to that?
There were farmers who were suffering significant problems in the state of Arkansas and in surrounding areas, and this was an effort to try to provide help and assistance at the request of those producers and at the request of members who represented them in Congress, which is not different than what is happening today on cotton.
And this was not a direct request of Senator Blanche Lincoln's failed 2010 Senate reelection bid?
Well, she was the chair of the Ag Committee, and obviously she made a request in her capacity as the chair and as a senator.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I'm having a hard time doing, and you would try one more time, but I've carried the conversation we had back to our industry leaders and members, colleagues on the committee, and we've got this difference of opinion as far as cotton is concerned. Obviously, lint is part of cotton. We export 80% of our lint. Cottonseed is a part of and we export less than 10% of cottonseed. It is my understanding, and this is testimony by a former chairman here, that you say that Congress expressly removed the eligibility of cotton for ARC and PLC assistance. It's true that upland cotton is no longer a covered commodity, but that completely misses a major point. The prior designation of upland cotton as a covered commodity only impacted cotton lint. Cottonseed has never been a covered commodity.
It's been, when we were structuring the stacks program, the industry requested that stacks cover cottonseed.
Do we have evidence of that? Can you get me evidence of that?
Well, I can get you the folks who at RMA.
Okay, because I can't seem to find anybody
well,
that...
No, Hindsight's always 20/20. And the reality, I mean, let's be candid here. The reality is that at the time this Farm Bill was being put together, everyone was operating under the assumption and belief that they needed to save $23 billion. And choices and issues had to be factored, and it was a lot of give and take. And cotton was also faced with the Brazilian cotton case and the retaliation that faced us as a result of that.
I understand.
And
I understand that.
decisions were made
Yes.
to create this program, and there was no effort at the time to include cottonseed in the list of all the other oil seeds that were known at the time. So, look, we have already expressed a willingness to help the cotton industry. So there's you know, if I believed in good faith that I had the ability to do this, I would do it. I do not believe in good faith I have that ability.
Well, what we believe is we expressly gave you the authority to designate other oil seeds at your discretion.
You gave me the authority in situations where oil seeds crop up in between farm bills that were not fully appreciated and not aware. We've never, ever exercised this particular provision in the way that you're asking us
Well,
to exercise.
you've got to give me more to go on because I'm having a very difficult time explaining that to my farmers back home who are going out of business. Thank you.
We'll be happy to help them if you give us the permission and the capacity. You
Gentleman's
can
time-
reopen the Farm Bill.
Gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Bost, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I'm going to go down a little bit different road. We actually, in the state of Illinois and everyone along the Mississippi River, had the wonderful opportunity at Christmas and New Year's to have what some people would consider not a real good gift and not a real happy New Year, in the fact that the Mississippi rose to the 1993 levels, but did it in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. When it did that, it blew through an area in deep southern Illinois known as the Lynn Small Levee, and I've got pictures are worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to show you what we've got and the sand that moved through and the devastation. This was all productive farmland prior to that levee break. Some of the area they have as much as 1 inch, most of it 3 to 5 feet of sand that moved in across. This, as you can see, is an irrigation system that was actually buried and wadded up. Now, that being said, the reason why I'm wanting to show you those is because in August of 2015, you declared 87 counties in Illinois an agricultural disaster in a letter to Governor Rauner. Also in that letter, you outlined the assistance available to producers in Illinois who may be affected, and noted that each claim would be treated on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Chairman, without objection, I would like to submit this letter to the Secretary and put into the record. Now, I understand, believe me, because I work with these people all the time, farming in the floodplain is tough. But that being said, my question is, will the same assistance that was provided in 2015 disaster declaration be available to producers in the affected areas of my district that experienced this flood? And I know that's pending on the governor's declaration. And how can the rural development help these communities that are in this situation?
It does. The governor can make this request, and then we have been turning around these requests very quickly, so we would wait the governor's request. I would be happy to have our staff take a look at whether or not a secretarial designation from me, which is not necessarily dependent on the governor's request, can be done. I don't know that it can, but we'll be glad to look at that. I'd say there are 2 or 3 places where we could provide some help. I think NRCS could potentially be helpful. There are obviously loans, disaster loans, that are available to producers. There's also the issue of what kind of crop insurance protection they have and the impact and effect that this is going to have on their ability to plant a crop in 2016 and what kind of protections may be afforded. And in terms of rural development, I'll have our folks reach out to you. I'm trying to think of the program within rural development that would be helpful. I think NRCS and FSA are probably more likely to be helpful.
Okay.
There may be something rural development can do, but my guess is it's primarily NRCS and FSA.
And kind of just following up on that, we know that obviously crop insurance, if they can get crops out at all this year, but crop insurance is actually going to go up because of this. Is there anything that they can be done to get relief from a potential increase for that insurance to try to bring that area back? Do you know that?
Well, there is the ability. Is that the annual production history? Oh. You know, I'll be happy to check with RMA about
Okay,
this.
if you can just work with our staff to try to figure out.
Yeah, I'd be happy to ask about
You know, and I'm going to switch to a different, just say thank you for your work on GMOs, and what we had to deal with out of this committee and what we moved as far as the problems that can exist with each state that is labeling out there. And we're hoping that this gets all the way through and we can actually stop it. But what happens if we don't get something done before July 1st?
Vermont law goes into effect. Food processing entities will have to think whether they want to segregate their supply chains and incur costs, or whether they want to do business or reduce access to product. And other states obviously are considering this. And frankly, the answer, and whatever's done, needs to recognize that this is not the first and only and last time we're going to be dealing with things like this. Folks are going to raise issues about how crops are raised all the time, so we have to have some kind of mechanism, I think the Smart Label answers this, to be able to rapidly adjust to whatever consumers are interested in knowing, but doing it in a way that doesn't convey the sense that the product is unsafe, because it's not. There are hundreds of studies to the effect that it's not unsafe.
Appreciate working with you on that, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Rouser, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being here. And I also want to quickly thank you for your help in working with us on lean meats as it related to the dietary guidelines. Two things I want to raise with you, and both are of great concern to me. And speaking of lean meats, pork, the other white meat, I understand the Humane Society filed a suit against USDA over the sale of that trademark. It's also my understanding that USDA may now be considering a settlement agreement with the Humane Society. As I understand the way this has played out, Humane Society filed the suit. The case was initially dismissed on the basis of a lack of standing. Then the D.C. Circuit reversed that ruling, but USDA did not appeal or otherwise exhaust any of the natural defenses that you typically would pursue. Was that a decision made by USDA, or was that made by the Department of Justice, or where was USDA in the mix on this?
It was a decision made in concert with the industry.
So now has the industry been in?
Industry's been involved in discussions and about how to structure this in such a way. The issue has to do with the payment for that trademarked phrase that's no longer being used. There's a question about the checkoff dollars being used in that way, and the industry is now working with the Humane Society in between the time frame that's been granted by the court to try to figure out how to do this in a way that is satisfactory to all parties.
Well, who suggested the settlement? Where did that come from? I can't imagine the industry suggested the settlement.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily correct. I think the industry is interested in getting this resolved.
Well, I can certainly understand that. I guess the part that concerns me a little bit is, it seems to be a tendency, and this is not just related to this specific case, but across the board, where someone files suit, and then rather than pursuing, every legal option available, we just settle. That's the overarching concern that I have across the board.
You may be right about other cases, but I don't think that's the situation here. I think the circumstances are that you've got a situation where payments were being made, multi-million-dollar payments were being made for something that was no longer being used, and I think legitimate questions were raised about that. And so in an effort to try to get matters resolved and get those monies continuing to promote the industry, the folks are in the process of discussing how this can be structured in a way that makes sense, that doesn't invite legal challenge.
Yeah. Moving on to another issue, cotton. You've heard a lot about cotton today. I'm not going to belabor the point, other than my producers back home are really struggling. In fact, I met with a group of cotton farmers last week. It is Their situation is quite concerning, and of course, all of agriculture, is struggling as it relates to commodity prices and the weather, et cetera. Where I have an even broader concern, though, is as it relates to fighting back with these other countries. Our farmers feel like they're the punching bag. When's the United States government? When are we going to fight back as it relates to domestic supports that are provided in other countries? For those countries that we're competing against, and that's a real frustration, I think, all across the country, and particularly in my district. When is the last time we have pursued a challenge against domestic supports, by another country?
Well, I think there's a case pending. Issues have been raised with China about poultry, but I'd be happy to get you the list of cases that have been raised or the issues that have been raised. Look, we've had 7 of the best years cumulatively of ag exports in the history of the country, and we are aggressively pursuing more opportunities, and we are convinced that the Trans-Pacific Partnership will provide us incredible opportunities, and reopening our opportunities in Cuba. So we are constantly looking for ways to expand market, and when we think there is a problem, I think the passage of the recent customs bill is a reflection of you all expressing a desire for more enforcement, and I think you're going to continue to see. And I think more cases have been brought in this administration, not necessarily in agriculture writ large, but the entire economy than any previous administration.
Well, not just opening markets, but I think it's important for us to go on offense and challenge some of these other countries the way they like to challenge us. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Jim, it's time to show back. Mr. LaMalfa, 5 minutes. Mr. Newhouse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Mr. Secretary, as everyone's singing your swan song, I don't know if it's totally unprecedented for the next administration to keep a current secretary, so just to put my 2 cents in on your performance. I appreciate working with you over the last 7 years. But a couple of questions real quickly. Earlier this month, I noticed that APHA's published a notice of intent to revise its biotech regulations and complete an environmental impact statement, an EIS, which is required under the NEPA for such changes. I got to tell you, first of all, that the notice of intent seemed somewhat vague. It wasn't clear what commodities or technologies were intended to be regulated, and under the notice, things previously unregulated would potentially fall under regulation, such as seedless watermelons, for one example. Could you tell me what prompted this regulatory revision and how a systemic revision can be expected to be? And then as a follow-up to that, I was very concerned that there was only given 30 days for a comment period, and as you well know, that something of this importance, I would hope we could have as much time as possible for our stakeholders to weigh in, and would you consider perhaps extending that 30-day period?
This has to do with the plant pest risk assessment section of the biotech regulations that USDA is involved in. We had proposed a set of changes many years ago that was sort of languished, and so we decided to withdraw that proposal and start the process again to give people an opportunity to refresh their comments as they had provided previous comments. We provided a list of alternative and options. One of those options has to do with trying to make this process as efficient as possible. We heard concerns from the industry that we take a good deal of time, and we've reduced that time from 90 months to about 13 months on average now. We've reduced the backlog, but there's still a desire for greater efficiency. So to the extent that we've already passed on a technology, the question is, why should we have to reevaluate that same technology if it's a different crop? That's a question, and I think a legitimate one for comment. As far as the comment period is concerned, we were always open if we see that there is a significant interest in this and there's a lot of demand. We have in the past been willing to provide additional time, and that may very well happen in this case. I don't want to commit to it, but it may very well happen.
I'd be open to that. Okay, well, thank you very much. On the GMO issue, I would just add my ditto to Mr. Boss' comment and appreciate your support on working on behalf of making sure we have a clear a clear movement forward, something that will prevent us from having a patchwork of regulations around the country. So thank you very much for your work on that issue. Let me talk a little bit about forest certification programs. Last September, the EPA published an interim recommendation for environmental standards, as well as eco-labels for use in federal procurement. Their recommendation for lumber excludes several what we see as credible standards, including the SFI, which is a Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and the ATFS, the American Tree Farm System. I don't have to tell you that across the United States, a huge percentage of the forest area is covered under those two systems. In my home state, I think 95% of the forests are covered under those. So I guess I can tell you I was disappointed to learn of this recommendation and would ask what kind of determination or without consultation by USDA should we see in the future? Is the USDA going to stand up for these certification programs? Could you provide us with an update on how you plan to educate the DOE as well as EPA about these certification programs?
Congressman, I'll be happy to ask our team to give you a full briefing on the process that is in place. If you see that it's not robust enough, I'm sure you will be able to tell us that. I can commit to you that we make every effort to try to make sure that EPA is aware of our views on certain things and what we think the likelihood will be of the impact in the field. Obviously, it's a sister agency, and frankly, I don't necessarily want, and I don't think you want the EPA to tell me what I should be doing. Do you?
Well, absolutely not, but I would be hopeful that you would engage with those two other agencies and encourage them, educate them as to the importance of those programs.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Jim's time expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Mr. LaMalfa, 5 minutes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Parachuting in here. Mr. Secretary, thank you for appearing again with us here today and your dedication to doing so in past hearings. An issue we have a lot, especially, it's important up in our district, is a Resource Advisory Committee known as the RACs. There's an appointment process which is important for the funding for the RAC for RAC work to be done on forestry and other land management issues, which is really important for secure rural schools, for example, in our area. And so what we find is that the RAC committees, some of them don't have enough members on them because of the appointment process hasn't been fulfilled to reach a quorum. They have to have a quorum to make decisions on the allocation of funding. So it delays the process for what Forest Service needs to get done and the BLM, et cetera. Are you aware of that, or is there some way we could goose this process along a little bit to get RAC appointees so they can have quorums and be doing their good work?
Congressman, I basically approve all those appointments, and from time to time, as I'm approving them, I notice that there are categories that are not filled because there's no nomination or no recommendation from the local area. I can't give you an example. There may be a request for, a Native American representative, or there may be a request for an engineer, or there may be a specific request the way the RAC is set up.
Do you have any flexibility where, let's just say Happy Camp, California may not have a lot of engineers in it for the area that RAC would cover, for example? Is there flexibility, or do you need a legislative fix to allow some more flexibility? Do you find you're bound by that a little bit?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I will take it back and find out.
Please, okay.
It has been frustrating to me because, sometimes I'll check off 6 names, but there are 8 other categories that are not.
Yeah, and I understand that they want a little diversity or all different types of input. I suppose maybe if we could narrow that down or broaden it to be public members. Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I don't know that it's our regulation that sets up the categories. I'm not sure about that, and that's what I'll check.
Okay, I'd love to help on that a little bit. And generally on Forest Service issues here, again, we've had a lot of fire in Northern California. You visited Trinity County here, was it 2 years ago, I think now? And we had 2014 devastating fire up in Siskiyou County as well. And we're just now getting to where they're putting out salvage contracts here in early 2016 for a 2014 fire. The process of doing the study and some of the background involved has taken so long that the value of the wood there for salvage, and it's a very modest project. 4% of the 200-something thousand acres we're talking about is what the project is. And the value of the wood goes away month by month with infestation of bugs and other things that happen to the burnt trees. So can you see a way we can expedite more? I mean, it seems like it's a reinvention of the wheel every time we have a salvage, like, oh, we never heard of that, we better study it to death. You know, and I'm not saying you, sir, but there's a process here that's very cumbersome that doesn't allow us to get out there and get on this, get the value out, and get the forest recovered. You see it on private lands, you can fly over it on the checkerboard pattern of private versus public lands. They're out there, they're recovering the forest, they're replanting, and our federal lands are the ones suffering, and it's the next tinderbox as the brush builds up and the old dead wood still stays there. I'll stop. Do you have a, can we help you in any area on that, or do you see a remedy?
Well, I'm a broken record on this. First and foremost, it's about staffing. And the reality is 50% reduction in staff because we're transferring money to put fires out.
We are working on that, sir.
Well,
we will put to allocate separately.
We have been working on it for years,
yeah,
Congressman. Yeah. We need to get it done this year.
Yeah, yeah. With
secondly,
bipartisan support to do it, so I hope we can
great.
do that.
It'll be a happy day for me. Secondly, I think we have looked at ways in which we can streamline the analysis, the NEPA process, and all that kind of stuff that has to go into any kind of federal action. We actually have streamlined that process, and we're continuing to look for more efficiencies in that process. And I think, from reference to Trinity County, I know that we just did enter into a fairly significant contract there. I was told just 2 days ago about that.
Yeah, this is one's western Siskiyou, but we just need help to be able to do it same season. I mean, really, ideally, you should be able to have a protocol you would follow immediately after fire when the last embers are out, that we're in there started, just like on private land. So anything we can do, please follow up, and I'd love to have the answer on that RAC questions as well and see what we need to do there. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Jim's time goes back. Trent, now it's your turn. Sorry about that.
Mr. Secretary, I stayed here for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I'm basically going to ask you some of the same questions that other people have asked you. It's more of an impassioned plea, and it's more of leadership, because I respect you tremendously, and I know that you can get to the right answer to do the right thing. And I wouldn't have stayed here and asked something if I didn't think. And I feel like the whole farm industry of my state depends on your decision, Mr. Secretary, that's yours to make. And quite frankly, I think that you're wrong in the way that you read the Supreme Court. And I'm a lawyer, and I understand those things. I understand I have JAG officers as a commander in the Guard who will tell me I can't do things when I know, in fact, that that's their interpretation of the law, but their interpretation is wrong, and I can go and do the research behind that to show that's not the only interpretation, and that's not the right interpretation. I know also, as a former district attorney, that we would argue over rules of evidence, or I would have briefs on cases which the circuit court judge had found something, and then the higher court would either reverse or affirm. And Mr. Secretary, all I ask you to do is to open your mind and go back and relook, because I think clearly the industry may have intended for cottonseed oil or not intended, but I don't care what the industry thinks. That's not what the statutory construction goes to, is what the industry thought. What the statutory construction goes to is what Congress thought. Not what the industry thought, which is a separate incident, but what Congress thought. And Mr. Secretary, I can truly say that I believe that Congress, when they said other oil seeds and allowed you the authority to do that, I don't think that they thought about cotton one way or the other. I think at that time, the only way they thought about cotton was in Lent. And Mr. Secretary, they've given you the power to do this. In this statute, as it's written, where it says other oil seeds, and it did not explicitly rule out cotton. Now, the industry may have talked about that, but the Congress and the committees in Congress did not. And Mr. Secretary, all I'm asking you to do is go back. You have the authority. And right now, timeliness is of the essence. If this doesn't happen quickly, and the other recommendations that you have aren't going to get us there, they're not quick enough. And I've had many, many officers over the years tell me that an 80% solution on time is better than a 100% solution 10 minutes after it works. And 10 minutes is too long. If we do this in August, if we do this in April, it's past the point to have an impact on my farmers. Back in the district this week, I went and spoke at the peanut buying point in Memphis, Tennessee, and I talked to a lot of my peanut farmers one-on-one. And it's not just cotton that is impacted. It's impacting my peanut farmers right now, because one of the most important or the most profitable places that you can make right now was peanuts. But right now I got cotton farmers growing peanuts because it's profitable, which depresses the price of my peanuts, which means now my peanut farmers are suffering some of the same thing. And Mr. Secretary, again, I respect you and I think you're doing the right thing, and I think that you got to that conclusion by looking at the law. The only thing I'll ask you, Mr. Secretary, is please relook at it, because I know that you have the authority and I know what congressional intent was at the time, and I think you can get to either, as most legal arguments, and you and I as lawyers understand that. You can get to the right answer if you choose to, Mr. Secretary. And as a plea from my farmers in Mississippi, I'm asking you at least reopen and relook and give them an opportunity to make the sale. And for your comments, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Yoho, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I sound like a broken record, I guess, but I do appreciate you being here today. As you know, the subject of GMOs come up often. It is relatively hot. It is relatively hot, a hot topic, and not all for the good. Seems that there are surprisingly large groups of folks that prefer the ostrich approach to science and feeding a growing world. Granted, some, like our European friends, are taking the anti-GMO position in a fairly blatant effort to obstruct trade and harm American farmers and ranchers. Others are doing so because they just don't know any better. The rest may honestly believe that the GMOs are harmful, even though pretty much everything they and their families eat is the product of genetic modification. You know, humans have been crossbreeding plants and animals for over thousands of years, and modern science just expedites that process. What concerns me, however, is that the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, doesn't seem to be a champion of the results of that science. And heck, I was in a briefing with Melinda Gates, and she sang the praises of GMOs and highlighted the fact that we can't feed the world or America's hungry, much less get them the needed increase in levels of vitamins and essential nutrients without the GMOs. If we want global security and stability, make sure people's bellies are full. You have agencies like the Agricultural Research Service and the National Institute for Agriculture, not to mention our land-grant universities, leading the charge for scientific advancement in the food and science industries in agriculture. Under your direction and the funding provided by the hardworking American taxpayers, we should be celebrating the safety and the increased benefits of these GMOs. And if not, maybe we should stop funding these. You know, we can't feed a world with just organic farm and farm plots. Not that there's anything wrong with them, there just aren't enough of them. And given all that, Mr. Secretary, when can we expect you and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to be the biggest cheerleaders for the sound science and feeding the world's poor and help stave off this hunger epidemic that's going to come when we hit 9 billion people in the world? To fend off the false narratives coming out of the media. We're funding all this stuff, but we're not seeing the results. We're not seeing not just you, but the USDA, the scientific community, our land-grant universities standing up and championing this. What are your thoughts on that? Congressman? I'm just trying to collect myself. Okay. Because I think what you have just outlined is just completely incorrect. How's that? Explain that. Because no one in the capital of Washington, D.C. has been more of an advocate for genetically modified technologies in agriculture than me. So I don't know what you're reading or what you're not reading. I don't know if you don't know about the fusses that we have with the Chinese over their regulatory system that I have been consistently fighting for 7 years. I don't know if you don't know about the 7 hours of meetings I had trying to broker a compromise on the issue of labeling. I don't know if you don't aren't aware of the fact that I was the co-chair of the Biotech partnership when I was governor, with Governor Joe Hans at the time, promoting this technology. I don't know if you don't know about all of the public comments I've made about the safety of this, including a comment that I made recently at the Appropriations Committee where factcheck.org wondered why I said there were hundreds of studies outlining the safety of biotechnology, only to find out that I was actually, I was wrong because there were literally thousands. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, let me interrupt here because there's a lot I don't know, I grant it. But what I can
Then
tell you is...
You shouldn't state that we're not championing this when we in fact are.
Well, let me give you an example. The papaya that was genetically modified for the ring spot virus in the University of Florida was done over 10 years ago, and we're still waiting for it to get released. It's just now getting ready to be released because of the narrative from the environmental groups and the EPA saying, well, we're not sure this is safe, but the studies were done. We should be up here in the government saying, hey, wait a minute, and go back to the EPA and say, hey, we've done the research, we know this is safe, and it's the same with so many of these other products. I mean, we did a teleconference call the other night, and people are saying you guys have taken away the ability to label GMOs, and we had to correct them, and I agree with the standards that you're talking about, but I want to hear the USDA, in the press, when they attack beef, and beef is bad, and this and that.
We have been. In fact, when I came into this office, there was a backlog of biotech regulatory actions. We have erased that backlog. So, it's just not even accurate. It's not even close to being accurate.
I disagree with you on that. I mean, if you look at that, I yield back, I'm over time.
Mr. Thompson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, it's good to see you. I'll try not to be a broken record. I can't even find a needle for my record player anymore. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for, I had hosted just a couple weeks ago an event in the district, trying to make it more efficient for the great people working at our NRCS and Rural Economic Development. We did an event, called it Finding Funding Opportunities Outreach Event. And it really did. I want to put a plug in for Gary Reed from my area, from NRCS, USDA employee. Did a great job coming out. We tried to make it one-stop shopping, so we had a room full of people that were township supervisors and community leaders and healthcare folks looking at all the different programs that are available through USDA, trying to make it easier for folks to navigate, and Gary did a great job. So thank you for that and your support of those programs. I just want to check in, as you know, the 2014 Farm Bill gave the Forest Service a lot of tools to help the agency better manage national forests, including some of the challenges we have. We did that through the categorical exclusions, dealing with insects, disease treatment designations, as well as reauthorization of both stewardship contracting, good neighbor authority. Any thoughts on how the Forest Service is doing with these tools? How's that working out?
Congressman, all I can tell you, I've got information in front of me here, and I hope it's accurate, but if you take a look at the time period from 2001 to 2008, we did 1,144 million board feet in Pennsylvania of treated wood. From 2009 to 2015, we've done 23,134 million board feet. So we are continually looking for ways in which we can increase activity.
And the board feet have been going up. I'm obviously chairman of the subcommittee. I track that very close across the country, but specifically in the Allegheny National Forest, which when you talk about across Pennsylvania, it's A&F. That's the forest. Any thoughts and breakdown? I know a lot of that increase has been in stewardship contracting, and that's important because that's how we go after undergrowth. That's how we go after the invasives and the non-invasive species that are diseases. But the real, the lifeblood of, and local jobs to do that, a lot of local contractors. But there's a distinct difference in the economic value, and I think in the long-term management of the forest, when you divide it between stewardship contracting and green stick. And I found, I think green stick production is still lacking. And I recognize you don't need to revisit the staffing issue. We brought that up and identified the number of foresters that we've lost, retirements, and in the Forest Service. We certainly recognize that. But any thoughts in terms of just where that number is and the distinction between stewardship contracting and green stick production?
Stewardship contracting agreements is providing roughly 30% of the timber volume.
Yeah, my goal, our goal, I think, with the committee is to see, as we get that, is work with you to help increase that number, and stewardship contracting as well, but we want green stick to obviously.
What are you thinking? I don't know, is it appropriate, Mr. Chair, if I ask a question?
I'd love it.
What do you think an appropriate ratio is?
Well, more, just given the status of where we are.
You mean less stewardship and more?
No, I think we want to see them both increase, but we don't want, where the stewardship contracting, which has been really good and has increased, but we also need to make sure that we're putting the resources on the ground, the boots on the ground, and getting the regulatory barriers. That's why we did the things with the categorical exemptions, giving you more of those tools, trying to take the target off your back from these environmental groups that are not achieving their mission. They're actually ruining our forests. They're allowing them to decay. We're allowing stands of timber till we get around to harvest them. We've gone past the point of the point of value. They're living entities, and they will start to decay and lose value. And I think that's the goal. There's a lot of frustration. I know members of the committee. I'm a fan of the Forest Service. I take the opportunity to stop in and thank the folks working the Forest Service wherever I travel.
One thing I've noticed in the last couple of years is that there is now a better collaborative spirit in many of the forests across the United States. I think people are recognizing precisely what you've said, which is that people got to get along here in order to get work done, and that there's been too much delay in the fussing and fighting that's been associated with the forest, and that has damaged the forest. So, hopefully we're going to see more collaboration and more quick contracting and more stewardship and more activity and more demand for the wood products that we're producing.
Very good. Thank you.
Jim, it's time expired. Mr. Secretary, I know you're getting close to your hard stop, and I certainly appreciate this morning. Let me ask you one other question real quick, and then I'll make some closing remarks, and you can flee the jurisdiction. But thank you for being here this morning. Appreciate it. I've had a multi-year disagreement with Secretary Mabus over the Navy, with in particular his greening of the Navy, the extra costs associated with that program that DOD is absorbing at a point in time where we're not being able to fly, our pilots aren't being able to fly as much as they need. There are a lot of readiness issues out there, just operational and maintenance things are going on. We specifically included in last year's NDAA a provision that said that the Navy cannot buy drop-in biofuels if the costs are not competitive with conventional fuels. And now I understand that USDA has weighed in using your CCC authorities to buy down or do whatever you're doing to buy down those costs, so that it looks like the Navy is buying this jet fuel, algae-based jet fuel or whatever, at something approaching what it would cost for normal fossil fuels-based jet fuels. Is it a misstatement on my part, a misunderstanding on my part? Is that what y'all are doing?
There was an agreement between the Department of Energy, the Department of the USDA, and the Department of Defense to try several years ago to try to encourage this industry, and we all pledged a certain level of resource to this effort. So that's what you've indicated is probably accurate. I'm not sure that I don't know how much assistance we provided, but I think we probably provided some assistance.
Yeah, I think at least in 2014 it was $161 million. We think it's $170 million this year. If that last number is one that was told to me, I don't have it. It may be just a pledge, but
I think it was that much.
If you would take this one for the record, because I caught you flat-footed, and this is not a gotcha session. We had enough of that today already. But take it for the record, because I am concerned that you guys might have been used to help the Navy get around an NDAA restriction that we put in there, and you certainly don't want to do that. Mr. Secretary, I don't know if you're the longest-serving Ag Secretary. You're one of the longer-serving Ag Secretaries, and the 14 months I've been in this slot, you've worked hard at developing a relationship with me, and I've reciprocated, and I think we built that. I never intended for the cotton thing to be personal at all, and we just have a disagreement, and I took an oath as well and you cloaking your comments this morning in an oath, me asking you to break your oath, I disagree with that. I would never ask you to break your oath and do something that was wrong or against the rules. I've got good lawyers on my team that are telling me you have all the authority you need to do that. And you've got good lawyers on your team telling you don't. And we always stick with the lawyers we pay. I got that. But I did not ask you to break I did not ask you to break your oath by any stretch of the imagination. And that was never intended. We got some cotton guys out there that are hurting. And you know that. You're sympathetic to their issues. I disagree with my colleague, Mr. Yoho. You are one of the best champions out there for biotechnology labeling. You had me at your home at dinner one night, and this subject came up out of the blue long before it became a hot topic, and you were already working on a solution to try to figure out how we can do this labeling thing so that we can get the consumer the information they want. It's not a food safety issue. So, you know, in other areas, you've done it really well. So we just have a disagreement. My good friend, Mr. Kelly, was very a lot better at expressing our desire to try to keep working on this cotton thing, Dean, because of the issues that are going on. But I do appreciate your 7 long years and whatever else, however much time left you have in your tenure. You've done a great job. Proud of the FSA and that work they do at implementing our farm bills. I'm proud of what your team does. And you know, there's some choices going out there. You guys made a choice that you wanted to plus up spending somewhere else in the farm bill, and you want to take it out of crop insurance. You know, those are just differences of opinion on this circumstances. We have cut your budget. You got divided government. You got this dust up between the White House and us. And while I'm not aware of the USDA overreaching its boundaries or going beyond its charters to do things that outside the rules, but we certainly have agencies that are out there that do that. And we're in a natural tough times. We got $19 trillion in debt, and we can't afford to do everything we wanted to. And so there are going to be some of those. But I did not ask you under any circumstance to break your oath, and never would. And I appreciate the hard work you put in all these years, the sacrifice you and your wife have made to serve this production agriculture in rural America the way you've done a great job. We just simply have a disagreement on an important issue that you know, all politics are local. I represent a bunch of cotton guys, and if this thing were going on in corn in Iowa, there, you know, who knows what might be happening. But I appreciate your efforts and would echo Mr. Kelly's comments if there's a way to rethink this. My public comments for the last 3 months on this issue, I've been very circumspect and trying to make sure that I didn't do anything that made it more difficult for you to get to the conclusion that we want, that you dig your heels in a way that makes this unworkable or not happening. And so none of my public comments have ever done anything but just say, look, we got to get to an answer. I don't care who gets credit for it. This is the designation that we want. So appreciate your understanding this morning. 2.5 hours of give and take, and I appreciate that and your service. So with that, let me get my official statement here. Ranking member wishes you well as well. Under rules of the committee, today's record of the hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material, supplemental written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing, Committee on Agriculture, is adjourned.